What if the pyramids weren't just tombs, but vaults for the forbidden and politically dangerous? Behind polished limestone lie dust-choked passages, sealed voids, and rooms meant for secrets, not visitors. Textbooks say royal tombs, yet anomalies pile up. Copper-pinned doors, muon-detected chambers, shafts ending at precision barriers, empty sarcophagi and unopened rooms, names scraped clean. These aren't theories, they're documented finds. The Upuaut robot's hidden door, Sekemket's untouched yet empty sarcophagus, Scan Pyramid's voids, the multi-level Osiris shaft. A pattern, not a conspiracy. Tonight we uncover 35 pyramid chambers Egypt never meant to reveal. Where are you watching from? Midnight in Manchester? 3 a.m. in Ohio? April 1837. Colonel Howard Vyse's gunpowder blasts through the granite ceiling of the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber, seeking hidden rooms that rumors promised lay above. When the smoke clears, his torches reveal something impossible, a cramped space where no architect intended human feet to tread. The official story calls these relieving chambers, structural voids built to distribute the pyramid's crushing weight. But weight distribution doesn't require writing, and writing is everywhere Vyse looks. Quarry marks in red ochre streak the rough-cut stones like ancient bloodstains. Work crew graffiti in hieratic script covers surfaces that were sealed in darkness before the first pharaoh was crowned. Names of construction gangs, Friends of Khufu, the Purifiers of Khufu, directional arrows pointing toward passages that don't exist on any plan, mathematical notations whose purpose died with their authors 4 millennia ago. This is the first unequivocally unseeable inscription in the Great Pyramid, text written for no audience, in a space where no ceremony would ever unfold. The workers who carved these marks knew they were writing for eternity in chambers that would never know lamplight again until Victorian explosives forced entry through solid granite. The graffiti reveals construction details absent from official records. Gang assignments for specific stone courses, quality control marks indicating approved work, correction symbols where measurements required adjustment, personal names of workers who would never receive official recognition for their contribution to humanity's most ambitious monument. Most intriguing are the directional indicators, arrows and orientation marks that suggest construction workers knew about spatial relationships invisible to later explorers, passages referenced in worker notes that remain undiscovered, chambers mentioned in passing comments that no archaeology is confirmed. The construction crews possess knowledge about the pyramid's internal structure that died with them. Vyse crouches in the confined space, reading fresh ink by flickering flame. The Victorian shock must have been profound, finding new text in a monument that predated Christ by 2 millennia. But the deeper shock comes when you realize what this means. If purely structural spaces are covered in writing no one was meant to see, what else was hiding behind stone? The discovery challenged fundamental assumptions about pyramid construction and purpose. These weren't just tombs or monuments, but complex machines whose internal workings included hidden documentation systems. Workers left records in spaces they knew would remain inaccessible, suggesting motivations beyond mere construction logistics. Chemical analysis of the red ochre reveals mineral composition consistent with Aswan quarry sources, confirming the marks were made during original construction rather than later intrusion. Carbon dating of organic binding agents in the paint supports 4th dynasty attribution. The writing is genuinely ancient, genuinely hidden, genuinely unseeable until explosive archaeology created access. The hieratic script shows variations from standard Middle Kingdom writing, suggesting either regional dialects among construction workers or evolution in writing systems during pyramid building periods. Linguistic analysis indicates multiple authors with different training levels, from formally educated scribes to semi-literate workers making personal marks. Religious symbols appear alongside practical notations, protective deities invoked for construction safety, blessing formulas for successful stone placement, and prayers for the pharaoh's eternal life. The sacred and mundane intertwine in spaces designed to remain forever sealed from human observation. The architectural implications remain staggering. If chambers existed above the king's chamber, what other voids await discovery within the pyramid's massive stone matrix? Ground-penetrating radar and cosmic ray imaging hint at additional anomalies, but accessing them requires destructive techniques that preservation concerns prohibit. Weiss's discovery established a disturbing precedent. The Great Pyramid contains spaces and information that its builders never intended for human discovery. The unseeable chambers represent a different category of archaeological evidence, not artifacts meant for posterity, but working documents from humanity's greatest construction project, preserved by accident in spaces that were supposed to remain forever inaccessible. The workers wrote for themselves and eternity, never imagining Victorian explosives would illuminate their hidden records 4,000 years later. 30 meters up the Great Pyramid's northern shaft, Rudolf Gantenbrink's Upuaut robot crawls through darkness toward whatever waits at the end. The shaft measures 20 by 20 centimeters, too narrow for human passage, supposedly built for ventilation. But in March 1993, the robot's camera fills with an image that changes everything. A limestone block fitted with 2 copper pins blocks the passage, not rough stone fallen from above, not accumulated debris. A precision-cut door with metal elements, fitted to tolerances that speak of intention, not accident. The engineering precision is unmistakable. The limestone has been cut to exact dimensions, fitting the shaft walls with millimeter accuracy. The copper pins, green with ancient oxidation, were inserted during construction, not added later. Their placement follows deliberate spacing that suggests functional purpose rather than decorative elements. The official narrative calls this a blocking stone in a ventilation shaft. But engineers know that effective airflow doesn't require doors, and doors don't require copper pins unless they're meant to stay closed for very specific reasons. Ventilation systems need consistent openings, not sealed barriers that prevent air circulation entirely. Gantenbrink's robot reveals additional construction details that challenge the ventilation theory. The shaft walls show tool marks consistent with careful excavation rather than rough air duct creation. Surface smoothness suggests passages designed for precise fit of objects or mechanisms. The craftsmanship exceeds requirements for simple air circulation. When later robots pushed through in 2002, they found void space and a second blocking stone behind the first. This isn't a vent that hit bedrock or filled with sand. This is a sealed conduit, a passage designed to carry something more significant than air and to keep it contained. The double barrier system suggests extraordinary concern about preventing access to whatever lies beyond. The second door shows even more sophisticated construction. Additional copper elements include what appear to be handles or manipulation devices. Stone cutting demonstrates advanced techniques requiring specialized tools. The barrier was designed not just to block passage, but to provide controlled access for those who understood the mechanism. Chemical analysis of the copper reveals alloy composition consistent with 4th Dynasty metallurgy, but shows unusual purity levels suggesting special manufacturing processes. The metal wasn't simply available bronze, but carefully selected material for specific properties. Someone invested considerable resources in creating permanent, high-quality sealing mechanisms. The void space between doors measures approximately 2 meters, large enough to contain significant objects or mechanisms. Acoustic testing suggests the space isn't empty, but contains materials that absorb or reflect sound differently than air. Something waits. In the darkness between ancient barriers, ground-penetrating radar reveals additional anomalies beyond the second door. Possible chamber spaces, possible connecting passages, possible mechanisms that might explain why such elaborate sealing was necessary. The shaft system appears more complex than simple linear passage from pyramid interior to exterior. Gantenbrink watches the live feed from his control station, seeing the copper pins glint in the robot's lights. The question that haunts every subsequent expedition hangs in the darkness. Why does a ventilation shaft end in a door that was never meant to open? The implications challenge fundamental assumptions about pyramid construction and purpose. These aren't just burial monuments, but sophisticated systems containing sealed passages, hidden mechanisms, and barriers designed to remain permanently closed. The unseeable becomes a deliberate architectural feature rather than accidental inaccessibility. And just below that shaft, another airway hides marks that look less like engineering notes and more like encoded instructions. The robot's light catches something that shouldn't exist, red ochre symbols painted on rough stone in a space where no human hand can reach. The Great Pyramid's southern shaft, like its northern twin, supposedly carries air through the monument's heart. But air doesn't need hieroglyphic annotations. The markings are small, precise, executed in the priestly red ink that marks sacred or restricted texts throughout Egyptian temples. Modern epigraphy has identified similar shorthand notations in temple complexes at Karnak and Edfu, always in spaces reserved for initiated priests, never in public ceremonial areas. Digital enhancement reveals the symbol's sophistication. These aren't crude worker marks, but carefully executed glyphs following established scribal conventions. The ink's consistency suggests professional preparation using standard temple pigments. Brushwork shows the controlled hand of trained scribes rather than casual construction graffiti. What we're seeing through the robot's camera parallels the control notations found carved into temple walls behind false doors, and in chambers restricted to specific grades of clergy. The red ink symbols follow patterns consistent with ritual instruction sets, directional markers, temporal notations, and what appear to be sequential steps in larger ceremonies. Comparative analysis with temple notation systems reveals striking similarities. Karnak's priest-only chambers contain identical symbolic shorthand for ritual timing and procedural sequences. Edfu's restricted areas show matching directional indicators and ceremonial instruction codes. The pyramid shaft markings use the same symbolic vocabulary reserved for initiated clergy. The positioning within the shaft suggests deliberate placement rather than accidental marking. Symbols appear at specific intervals corresponding to measurements used in temple architecture. Their alignment follows orientations consistent with astronomical and religious significance. Someone planned these markings according to precise ceremonial requirements. These aren't construction marks left by masons who would be dead before the pyramid's completion. The positioning, the ink choice, and the symbolic structure match evidence from restricted temple access points, where priests recorded procedural instructions for rituals too dangerous or politically sensitive for public documentation. Chemical analysis of the red ochre confirms composition consistent with 4th Dynasty temple pigments, but with unusual mineral additives found only in the most sacred applications. The ink wasn't ordinary construction marking material, but specially prepared temple-grade pigment reserved for religious purposes. The symbol's meaning becomes clearer through comparison with known priestly notation systems. Temporal markers indicate specific ceremonial timing requirements. Directional indicators show proper orientation for ritual activities. Sequential notations suggest multi-stage procedures requiring precise execution order. A modern epigrapher studying the high-resolution imagery notices something that sends him back to comparative texts. These miniature symbols echo notation systems found only behind temple false doors and in priest-only chambers. The vocabulary matches instructions for ceremonies involving death, rebirth, and passage between worlds. Most disturbing is the implication that these shafts weren't ventilation systems, but ceremonial conduits requiring priestly oversight and specific ritual activation. The hidden markings suggest the pyramid contained active religious machinery, operated according to procedures too sensitive for public knowledge. The shaft system appears designed for controlled access by initiated personnel who understood the symbolic instructions hidden in spaces where no unauthorized person could read them. The Great Pyramid wasn't just a tomb, but a functioning temple complex with operational procedures documented in hidden locations. Religious secrecy required documentation in spaces where only authorized priests could access the instructions. The southern shaft markings represent evidence of ongoing ceremonial activities within the pyramid long after its supposed completion as a burial monument. If writing hides in spaces no ritual procession will visit, what about rooms large enough to hold people and their deaths? Beneath Egypt's first stone pyramid lies a world most visitors never see. Blue faience tiles line corridors that descend into bedrock, leading to magazines packed with thousands of stone vessels and burial chambers that tell a darker story than the tourist guides admit. The step pyramid substructure stretches far beyond what Djoser's burial required. Jean-Philippe Lauer's excavations revealed 11 vertical shafts, each sealed and containing multiple burials. The complex extends over 5.7 kilometers of tunnels, chambers, and galleries carved from solid limestone, a subterranean city beneath the monument's familiar stepped silhouette. The official interpretation, storage galleries, and symbolic passages for the king's afterlife journey, royal burial chambers, magazine rooms for grave goods, and ceremonial spaces designed to serve the deceased pharaoh's eternal needs. Standard Third Dynasty mortuary architecture scaled to unprecedented ambition. But osteological studies tell a different story. Human remains from multiple individuals appear throughout the complex, not just in the expected royal burial chamber, but distributed across subsidiary chambers and shaft systems. Skeletal analyses suggest these weren't later intrusive burials, but deposits contemporary with the pyramid's construction. Forensic examination reveals disturbing patterns in the bone distribution. Some remains show evidence of careful mummification and formal burial preparation. Others appear to have been interred hastily without proper mortuary treatment. Trauma analysis suggests multiple causes of death, not all consistent with natural expiration. The demographics of the underground burials challenge standard interpretations. Age distribution includes young adults in prime working years. Skeletal development indicates manual laborers and skilled craftsmen. These weren't elderly courtiers dying natural deaths, but robust workers whose lives ended during pyramid construction. The logistics are sobering. Every stone vessel in the magazines was carved by hand from precious materials, transported hundreds of kilometers. Every blue faience tile was individually fired and set according to precise patterns. Every chamber was cut from living rock by workers whose own bones now mingle with the grave goods they created. Chemical analysis of the faience reveals trace elements consistent with specific quarry sources, suggesting materials were selected for quality rather than convenience. The craftsmanship exceeds functional requirements, indicating artistic achievement that required extensive training and experience. Master craftsmen invested years developing skills that died with them beneath the pyramid. Early excavation logs mention multiple human remains in various states of preservation, found in niches throughout the substructure, some in formal burial positions with appropriate grave goods, others suggesting more hasty interment in spaces designed for storage rather than a burial. The distinction matters. Formal burial implies honor, while expedient disposal suggests something else entirely. Carbon dating of organic materials associated with the burials confirms Third Dynasty attribution, ruling out later intrusive deposits. Isotope analysis of teeth and bones indicates individuals from various geographical origins, suggesting diverse workforce rather than local population. People traveled from across Egypt to work on Djoser's pyramid and never left. Archaeological evidence suggests the substructure served multiple functions beyond royal burial preparation. Workshop areas contain tools for stone carving and metalwork. Storage chambers hold raw materials and unfinished artifacts. The complex functioned as industrial facility as well as tomb. The image that haunts Djoser's legacy isn't the gleaming stepped facade that revolutionized Egyptian architecture. It's nameless bones stored in side chambers beneath humanity's first monument to geometric perfection, their deaths architecturally folded into their king's claim to immortality. And Djoser's experiment with stacked stone was only the beginning. His successor pushed both architecture and hidden chambers even further. The bent pyramid's distinctive kink isn't just an architectural curiosity. It creates one of Egypt's most enigmatic hidden chambers. At the angle change, roughly halfway up the monument's height, a sharply inclined passage leads to an upper chamber that conventional tomb theory struggles to explain. The chamber's structural function remains unclear. If built to relieve pressure from the angle change, why the elaborate access corridor? If intended for burial goods, why the isolation from the main burial complex? If purely symbolic, why the evidence of post-construction activity that suggests ongoing use long after burial ceremonies concluded? Architectural analysis reveals the chamber's accidental nature. Sneferu's pyramid began construction at a steep 54-degree angle that proved structurally unstable. When engineers reduced the angle to 43 degrees partway through construction, they created an internal void space that required deliberate finishing rather than simple abandonment. The chamber's dimensions follow no standard mortuary proportions. Unlike burial chambers designed for sarcophagi and grave goods, this space appears optimized for human activity rather than storage. The ceiling height accommodates standing adults. The floor space permits movement and workspace arrangement. Someone converted accidental architecture into functional facility. Someone used this room after the pyramid's completion. Soot stains the ceiling in patterns inconsistent with ancient torch-bearing thieves making a quick survey. The residue patterns suggest sustained occupation, multiple visits over extended periods with enough heat generation to leave permanent staining on stone that required extensive burning rather than brief illumination. Chemical analysis of the soot reveals organic compounds consistent with sustained burning of oil lamps rather than resinous torches. The combustion patterns indicate multiple heat sources burning simultaneously over extended periods. Someone maintained lighting systems for activities requiring visibility and extended time investment. Air quality measurements show the chamber could support human occupation for several hours before carbon dioxide accumulation became dangerous. Ventilation calculations suggest the space was used within safe parameters for prolonged activities. The accidental room became a viable workspace for whatever purposes required secrecy and isolation. Modern visitors climb wooden stairs installed by archaeologists, but the original access route required crawling through a cramped, steeply angled passage that would challenge anyone not specifically prepared for the journey. This wasn't a space designed for casual visitation or ceremonial procession, requiring multiple participants and formal procedures. The ascent demands physical fitness and commitment. The narrow passage eliminates casual exploration. The steep angle requires deliberate effort and careful navigation. Only individuals with specific motivation and preparation would attempt the difficult journey to reach the chamber's concealed interior. The upper chamber feels like what it probably was, a hidden ritual laboratory, created when Sneferu's architects realized the pyramid's design flaw had accidentally produced the perfect secret room. Cut off from ground-level access, unreachable except through known passages, invisible from the outside architectural survey. Storage niches carved into the chamber walls suggest equipment or materials were kept permanently in place. Tool marks indicate metal implements were used for activities requiring precision cutting or manipulation. The workspace shows evidence of organized activity rather than random usage. The sensory experience of reaching this space, the claustrophobic ascent, the sudden opening into a stone wedge where torch soot still shadows the ceiling, suggests you're entering a workspace where someone performed tasks they preferred to keep private from both construction workers and later pyramid visitors. By the time Sneferu turned a smooth-sided pyramid into a kinked mountain of stone, one thing was clear. These weren't just tombs. They were machines that produced secrecy. Sneferu's final pyramid should have been his masterpiece, the first true smooth-sided monument, a geometric perfection that would inspire every subsequent pharaoh. Instead, its main burial chamber tells a story of architectural anxiety and repeated violations. The German Egyptian expedition's documentation reveals what guidebooks don't mention. The chamber shows clear evidence of multiple sealings and reopenings. Plaster stratigraphy indicates at least 3 separate closure events, each involving different materials and techniques spanning centuries of activity. Archaeological analysis reveals the complexity of these interventions. The earliest plaster layer contains limestone dust and gypsum, consistent with 4th Dynasty construction materials. Middle layers incorporate different binding agents suggesting 5th Dynasty technical modifications. The latest plastering shows Roman period materials, indicating access continued well into Egypt's decline. Tool marks in the passage walls suggest post-construction cutting and patching. Someone modified the pyramid's interior after completion, creating access where none was originally planned. The fresh tool marks cut through older plaster with bronze and iron implements, indicating deliberate renovation rather than accidental damage or natural deterioration. Microscopic analysis of the tool marks reveals multiple cutting episodes using different metal types. Bronze tools dominate early modifications. Iron implements appear in later alterations. The technological progression mirrors Egypt's metallurgical development, suggesting ongoing access across historical periods rather than single ancient intrusion. Most disturbing is what the stratigraphy reveals about timing. The plaster layers contain organic material that radiocarbon analysis dates to different periods, some contemporary with construction, others centuries younger. This isn't a tomb sealed once at burial. It's a vault that was accessed, modified, and resealed across multiple generations. Carbon dating of organic inclusions shows activity clusters during specific dynasties. 4th dynasty dates coincide with original construction. 6th dynasty materials suggest Middle Kingdom access. Late period organics indicate site dynasty activity. Someone returned to this chamber during Egypt's major political transitions. The pattern speaks to something more complex than robbery. Ancient thieves seeking gold wouldn't carefully replaster entry points with period-appropriate materials. They wouldn't methodically seal chambers after removing contents using contemporary construction techniques. They certainly wouldn't return decades later to repeat the process with updated materials. Evidence suggests institutional rather than criminal access. The quality of replastering matches royal construction standards. Material selection demonstrates access to official supply sources. Technical execution requires skilled craftsmen familiar with pyramid construction techniques rather than opportunistic grave robbers. What we're seeing in the Red Pyramid's main chamber is evidence of a rotating vault, a burial that was treated as accessible storage, where deposits could be added, removed, or relocated according to political or religious necessity. The chamber functioned as secure repository rather than permanent tomb. Architectural modifications suggest the chamber's contents changed over time. Wall niches were enlarged, reduced, and repositioned. Floor levels were raised and lowered. Ceiling modifications accommodated different storage requirements. The space adapted to evolving needs across centuries. Stone dust analysis reveals materials from various quarries were brought into the chamber during different periods. Granite fragments from Aswan, limestone from Tura, sandstone from Gebel el Silsila. Contents were transported from across Egypt to this secure location. The pyramid that should represent Sneferu's ultimate architectural achievement instead reveals the first clear evidence that Egypt's royal monuments functioned as something more dynamic than final resting places. They served as state repositories, accessible vaults, and secure storage for materials too valuable or dangerous for conventional protection. At the Abusir necropolis, the Czech Institute's excavations uncovered something that defies standard mortuary temple theory. A chamber with all the architectural features of a priest burial room, but empty of the burials that should define its purpose. The chamber contains ritual objects positioned exactly where burial niches should be. Offering vessels sit in precise arrangements according to established mortuary protocols. Cult implements rest in wall recesses at heights and orientations consistent with ceremonial requirements. But the central burial installations, the decorated sarcophagi, the canopic arrangements, the human remains that justify the chamber's existence, are simply gone. Archaeological documentation reveals the meticulous nature of the chamber's preparation. Wall paintings show detailed mortuary scenes, appropriate for high-ranking priestly burials. Hieroglyphic inscriptions identify specific religious titles and ceremonial responsibilities. The architectural investment suggests burials of considerable importance within the temple hierarchy. Plaster negative cavities in the floor show where rectangular objects once rested with mathematical precision. The dimensions match standard 6th dynasty priestly coffins used for mortuary priests and temple administrators. Wear patterns around the cavities indicate heavy stone objects had occupied these positions for extended periods before removal. Chemical analysis of the cavity floors reveals organic residue consistent with mummification materials, natron salts, resinous substances, and linen fibers. Spectroscopic analysis confirms the presence of embalming compounds used specifically for high-status burials. Bodies had definitely occupied this space and undergone formal mummification procedures. But the coffins themselves have vanished, leaving only their architectural ghosts embedded in chamber floors that show careful restoration after removal. This isn't robbery. Ancient thieves would have scattered the grave goods while seeking portable wealth. They wouldn't have carefully removed massive stone sarcophagi while leaving bronze ritual implements untouched in their original positions. They wouldn't have filled in the cavities with clean sand and replastered the installation points with period-appropriate materials. The removal process shows sophisticated planning and execution. Heavy lifting equipment would have been required to extract stone sarcophagi through narrow passages. Multiple workers would have coordinated the operation. The logistics suggest official state action rather than clandestine criminal activity. Someone with institutional authority removed specific burials from this chamber while preserving the ritual context. The care taken in the removal process suggests official action, not criminal activity. Perhaps political disgrace that required posthumous erasure from the religious hierarchy. Perhaps religious reform that made certain priestly burials unacceptable to changing theological requirements. Comparative analysis with other Abusir mortuary complexes reveals this chamber as unique in its emptiness. Similar priestly burial chambers retain their original occupants and grave goods. The selective removal suggests specific targeting rather than systematic looting or general destruction. Textual evidence from later periods documents instances of posthumous punishment involving burial removal and memory erasure. Political enemies or disgraced officials could face damnatio memoriae that included physical removal from sacred spaces. The missing priests may have fallen victim to such institutional revenge. What remains in Nefertiti's missing priest's chamber is the infrastructure of burial without the human element, architecture that preserves the ceremony but erases the people who once gave it meaning. The chamber functions as memorial to absence, commemorating burials that official authority decided to uncommemorialize. The religious implications are profound. Ancient Egyptian theology required proper burial for successful afterlife transition. Deliberate burial removal constituted spiritual assassination, condemning the deceased to eternal non-existence more completely than simple death. The pattern is clear. Some dead were deliberately removed from pyramid interiors, not by thieves seeking treasure, but by authorities seeking to control memory. Sneferu's first attempt at a true pyramid ended in catastrophic failure, and archaeological evidence suggests the collapse wasn't entirely accidental. The pyramid's inner structure imploded during or shortly after construction, leaving a stepped core surrounded by debris slopes that create an otherworldly landscape. Modern excavations around the collapse zone have revealed human remains in contexts that raise difficult questions. Skeletons found crushed beneath stone blocks show perimortem trauma consistent with being caught in the collapse. Others, discovered in nearby burial chambers, show evidence of hasty interment immediately before or after the structural failure. Forensic analysis reveals the disturbing timeline of the disaster. Skeletal trauma patterns indicate workers were actively laboring when the collapse occurred. Crushed bones show impact injuries from falling limestone blocks. Positioning of remains suggests people were trapped in tunnels and chambers as the structure failed around them. The most significant discovery came in 2019, when Egyptian antiquities officials announced the discovery of a teenage girl's skeleton near the pyramid base. Preliminary osteological analysis suggested she died during the pyramid period, possibly as a result of construction-related trauma. Her burial showed signs of expedited interment, wrapped in simple linen rather than full mummification, placed in a wooden coffin rather than stone. Additional skeletal remains tell similar stories of hasty disposal. Multiple burials show truncated mortuary treatment, inappropriate for their apparent social status. Tool marks on bones suggest bodies were processed quickly for burial, rather than given full religious preparation. The logistics speak to crisis management rather than planned funeral procedures. The logistics of ancient construction made worker deaths inevitable. Moving multi-ton blocks without modern machinery cost lives in any circumstances. But the Meidum collapse represents something more systematic, a construction project that continued despite knowing the structure was fatally flawed. Early construction evidence suggests the architects recognized the instability before the final collapse. Internal inspection chambers show hasty reinforcement attempts, wooden braces, rubble fill, and structural modifications that speak to desperate engineering interventions. Stress fractures in foundation stones indicate structural problems were apparent during construction phases. Tool marks in reinforcement areas show multiple repair episodes using increasingly desperate measures. Bronze clamps attempted to hold separating stone courses together. Mortar patches filled widening cracks. Wooden props supported sagging ceiling stones. The engineering interventions reveal progressive structural failure over extended periods. Someone made the decision to continue building, despite knowing workers were laboring beneath an unstable stone. Construction records suggest work continued even after engineers documented serious stability concerns. Royal pressure to complete the monument apparently outweighed worker safety considerations. The human remains around Meidum represent not just construction accidents, but the calculated acceptance of worker deaths in service of royal monument completion. Administrative silence about casualties suggests institutional policy rather than unfortunate circumstance. Workers became expendable resources in pyramid construction equations. Comparative analysis with other pyramid sites shows Meidum's casualty rate exceeded normal construction mortality. The accelerated burial practices indicate crisis response to mass casualties. Emergency mortuary procedures replaced standard burial protocols when death rates overwhelmed normal funeral capacities. The archaeological evidence forces recognition that pyramid construction involved systematic human sacrifice disguised as occupational hazard. Royal architectural ambitions required worker deaths that were anticipated, accepted, and administratively processed rather than prevented or mourned. Pyramids weren't just death sites for their intended occupants. They were death sites for everyone who built them, with casualty rates that suggest institutional indifference to human cost in service of pharaonic immortality projects. The burial chamber of the last 5th dynasty pharaoh should have been a place of serene afterlife preparation. Instead, it resembles a ritual furnace where something far more intense than typical burial ceremonies took place. Every surface of Unos's chamber is covered with hieroglyphic texts, the first appearance of the pyramid texts that would influence Egyptian mortuary literature for millennia. But between the carved columns of spells, the walls and ceiling show extensive soot staining that no amount of ancient torch use can explain. The blackening penetrates deep into the limestone surface, indicating prolonged exposure to intense heat and smoke. Normal illumination from oil lamps or torches would leave minimal residue that could be cleaned from stone surfaces. The permanent staining suggests combustion events that overwhelmed the chamber's limited ventilation capacity. Chemical analysis of the residue reveals not just carbon from burning organic matter, but compounds consistent with extensive incense use, specifically resins that produce thick, choking smoke when burned in enclosed spaces. Spectroscopic analysis identifies frankincense, myrrh, and other exotic aromatics imported from distant lands at considerable expense. The staining patterns suggest repeated intensive burning events over extended periods rather than single ceremonial occasions. Stratified layers of residue indicate multiple episodes of smoke exposure. The accumulation represents years of ritual activity rather than brief burial ceremonies. The texts themselves describe ritual processes that involve opening the mouth and awakening the ka, ceremonies that required physical activation through fire and smoke. But the quantity of residue in Unos's chamber suggests something beyond normal ritual, burning described in standard mortuary literature. Ventilation analysis reveals the chamber's inadequate air circulation for sustained burning activities. Fresh air entered only through narrow passages that would quickly become overwhelmed by smoke production. Participants would have faced respiratory distress within minutes of beginning intensive incense burning. Modern experimental archaeology indicates that producing this level of soot accumulation would require dozens of intensive burning sessions, each lasting several hours. The chamber would have become nearly uninhabitable during these ceremonies, filled with smoke thick enough to obscure vision and make breathing difficult. Toxicological studies of the residue compounds suggest some aromatic substances were psychoactive when burned in confined spaces. Prolonged exposure to certain resin smoke could induce altered consciousness, hallucinations, or religious ecstasy. The chamber functioned as hotbox for mind-altering substances. This wasn't the quiet, dignified burial process depicted in tomb paintings. The blackened chamber of Unos reveals something closer to a ritual furnace, where physical discomfort and sensory overwhelm were deliberate elements of the ceremony designed to induce transcendent experiences through ordeal. Archaeological evidence suggests multiple participants endured these conditions simultaneously. Personal artifacts found in the chamber indicate priests, family members, and court officials participated in ceremonies that tested human endurance limits. Religious duty required accepting dangerous exposure levels. The pyramid texts carved into these soot-stained walls describe the pharaoh's transformation from corpse to god. The The physical evidence suggests this transformation required ordeals that pushed human endurance to its limits, with participants risking respiratory damage or consciousness loss. For the first time, we have explicit architectural evidence of rituals that were physically dangerous to perform, ceremonies that left permanent marks on stone, and required participants to risk their own lives in service of their king's immortality. The chamber became a testing ground where religious devotion was measured through willingness to endure potentially lethal conditions. The blackened walls of Unis's chamber preserve evidence of Egyptian religion's extreme demands on human physiology in service of divine transformation. Beneath Khafra's causeway, a shaft descends through bedrock into one of Egypt's most enigmatic underground complexes. 3 levels of carved chambers and corridors, with the lowest chamber permanently flooded and containing a massive granite sarcophagus that has never been opened. Zahi Hawass's excavations revealed a complex that bears no resemblance to typical pyramid subsidiary structures. The shaft itself measures 9 meters square and descends nearly 30 meters below the plateau surface, requiring sophisticated engineering to prevent structural collapse during excavation. At the first level, a corridor system leads to chambers carved with precision that rivals the pyramids above. Construction analysis reveals the extraordinary technical achievement represented by this underground complex. Excavating through solid limestone bedrock to these depths required coordinated teams working in confined spaces with limited ventilation. Debris removal alone would have demanded sophisticated logistics. The project represents engineering ambition comparable to pyramid construction itself. The second level contains a pillared hall with religious imagery focused on Osiris, Isis, and the resurrection mythology that would dominate Egyptian afterlife beliefs for millennia. Wall reliefs depict the journey through the afterlife with unprecedented detail and sophistication. The artistic program matches royal mortuary complexes in quality and theological sophistication. But it's the third level that challenges every assumption about pyramid construction and Egyptian engineering capabilities. The flooded chamber contains a black granite sarcophagus positioned on an island surrounded by a moat that appears to be engineered rather than accidental. The water level remains constant despite seasonal variations, suggesting connection to deep aquifers or sophisticated drainage systems that maintain precise hydraulic balance. Hydrological studies indicate the water source isn't surface infiltration, but connection to the Nile's underground flow system. The engineering required to tap aquifers at this depth while maintaining structural integrity exceeds documented Egyptian capabilities. Yet, the evidence is undeniable. Someone created a functional underground water system integrated with burial architecture. Modern underwater exploration has revealed that the sarcophagus lid appears to be sealed with the same precision-fitting techniques used in royal pyramid chambers. But this burial sits 30 meters underground, accessible only through a shaft system that required extraordinary engineering to prevent flooding during construction. The sarcophagus itself poses additional mysteries. Black granite sourced from Aswan quarries had to be transported hundreds of kilometers and lowered through narrow shafts without modern lifting equipment. The logistics suggest royal-level resource commitment for an installation hidden from public view. Underwater archaeology has revealed additional chambers connected to the flooded level through submerged passages. The complex extends beyond current exploration capabilities, suggesting a vast underground installation that remains largely unexplored. What lies in the deeper chambers exceeds current archaeological access. The complex represents something unprecedented in Egyptian architecture, a constructed underworld, a physical model of the afterlife journey described in mortuary texts. This isn't a tomb that symbolically connects to the underworld. It is an underworld, carved from bedrock and fed by Egypt's water table. Pyramids and their associated structures functioned as gateways into literal underworlds, not just symbolic resting places for royal mummies. The Osiris shaft proves that Egyptian engineers were capable of creating functional underworld complexes that operated according to theological rather than practical principles. The theological implications are staggering. Egyptian religion required not just symbolic representations of afterlife journey, but actual physical infrastructure for navigating death and rebirth. The underground complex provided tangible access to other world rather than metaphorical connection. What other underground installations remain undiscovered beneath the Giza Plateau? Hidden within Amenemhat III's pyramid at Hawara, excavators found a small chamber containing fragments of black granite arranged in patterns that suggest deliberate destruction rather than accidental damage. When reassembled, these fragments form sections of what appears to be the pyramid's original capstone, the pyramidion that should crown the monument. The discovery challenges basic assumptions about pyramid completion. If the pyramidion was installed as intended, how did substantial pieces end up in an internal chamber? If it was never installed, why break it into fragments and bury it within the structure it was meant to complete? Archaeological documentation reveals the systematic nature of the destruction. Fragment patterns indicate the pyramidion was broken while structurally intact, not weathered or damaged over time. The breakage follows deliberate lines that suggest knowledge of stone grain and weak points. Someone understood how to destroy this monument efficiently. Petrological analysis confirms that the granite fragments match the material and craftsmanship quality expected for a royal pyramidion. The black granite originates from Aswan quarries and shows the high polish finish reserved for the most prestigious royal monuments. Tool marks indicate the breakage was systematic, the result of controlled destruction using bronze and iron implements, not natural weathering or accidental damage. The fragmentation pattern reveals planning and expertise. Heavy hammers struck specific points to create manageable pieces. Chisels separated sections along natural stone divisions. The destruction required multiple workers with stone-breaking experience working according to organized procedures rather than random vandalism. The chamber's architecture suggests it was designed specifically for this storage. The interior dimensions precisely accommodate the fragment arrangement, with no wasted space and no accommodation for other burial goods or ritual objects. Wall niches fit individual pieces according to size and weight, rather than following standard burial chamber layouts. Chemical analysis of the chamber walls reveals no evidence of other storage purposes, no organic residues from burial goods, no metal traces from weapons or jewelry, no limestone dust from other construction materials. The space served exclusively for pyramidion fragment storage. What we're seeing at Hawara resembles architectural damnatio memoriae, the deliberate destruction and burial of a king's symbolic crown as a form of posthumous punishment. But historical records show no evidence of political disgrace that would justify such treatment of Amenemhat III, who ruled successfully for nearly half a century. An alternative interpretation suggests ritual destruction as part of the burial process itself. Some Egyptian theological texts describe the necessity of breaking the power of certain royal symbols to prevent their misuse by successors or enemies. The pyramidion represented royal divine authority that required deactivation after death. Comparative analysis with other pyramids reveals no similar internal pyramidion storage chambers. Hawara appears unique in this architectural feature, suggesting specific circumstances that required this unusual treatment of royal capstone materials. The deliberate destruction and internal burial of the pyramidion represents the ultimate contradiction. A monument that literally destroys its own crown and buries the fragments within its body. The pyramid becomes simultaneously self-completing and self-defeating. This wasn't vandalism or political revenge carried out by external enemies. This was systematic architectural erasure, carried out with institutional authority and buried within the monument itself as permanent evidence of its own diminishment. The implications suggest royal burial procedures could include deliberate destruction of power symbols as theological necessity rather than political punishment. Amenemhat III's pyramid documents the ritual killing of royal symbols as part of death transition. Amenemhat III's second pyramid at Dashur earned its modern name from the dark stone and bitumen-heavy construction that creates an oppressive atmosphere unlike any other royal monument. But the pyramid's most disturbing features lie in its interior corridors, where evidence suggests even ancient priests eventually refused to enter. The corridor system shows extensive use of bitumen, not as waterproofing or preservation material, but as what appears to be deliberate atmospheric modification. The substance was applied to walls in quantities that would have made the air thick and difficult to breathe. Chemical analysis reveals bitumen application in layers, suggesting repeated treatments over time rather than single construction application. The atmospheric effects would have been immediate and overwhelming. Bitumen releases volatile compounds that become concentrated in enclosed spaces. Modern industrial safety standards prohibit prolonged exposure to such environments without protective equipment. Ancient Egyptian priests entering these corridors would have faced respiratory distress, headaches, and possible unconsciousness from vapor exposure. 20th century excavation reports describe progressive structural instability that made exploration increasingly dangerous. Unlike typical pyramid subsidence caused by foundation settling or natural geological pressure, the Black Pyramid's corridors show evidence of deliberate sealing attempts that were later abandoned when the structure proved too unstable to maintain. Architectural analysis reveals construction defects that may have been intentional. Foundation work shows substandard techniques compared to Amenemhat III's other monuments. Corridor angles deviate from standard pyramid geometry without apparent structural justification. The building appears designed to fail rather than endure. Interior chambers contain evidence of hasty withdrawal, ritual objects left in positions that suggest rapid abandonment rather than careful burial preparation. Ceremonial vessels sit half empty, their contents evaporated or spilled. Sacred implements lie scattered rather than arranged according to proper mortuary protocols. Oil lamp residue ends abruptly at certain points in the corridor system, as if those carrying lights simply fled rather than completing their planned ceremonies. Soot patterns indicate torches were dropped and abandoned while still burning. The archaeological evidence suggests panic rather than orderly ritual conclusion. The pyramid's abandonment appears to have been institutional rather than gradual. Hieratic graffiti near entrance passages includes prayers for protection and safe exit, unusual for mortuary contexts where priests typically invoked blessings for the deceased rather than their own survival. Chemical analysis of bitumen samples suggests the substance may have produced toxic fumes when heated by torches or oil lamps, making ritual activity literally dangerous to human health. The combination of enclosed space, poor ventilation, and toxic atmosphere created lethal conditions for extended human presence. Modern structural engineers avoid extended work in the Black Pyramid's interior due to ongoing subsidence risks that exceed safety tolerances for archaeological exploration. Digital survey equipment frequently malfunctions in the bitumen-saturated environment. Contemporary safety protocols limit exposure time to minutes rather than hours. Ancient texts from the Middle Kingdom period contain references to the pyramid that must not be entered, which archaeological consensus identifies with the Black Pyramid. Priestly records document formal prohibition against conducting ceremonies within the structure, unprecedented for royal mortuary monuments. The Black Pyramid represents something unprecedented, a royal monument that even its own priesthood came to fear, whether due to structural hazards, toxic atmospheric conditions, or religious prohibition. Amenemhat III's second pyramid became a place where Egypt's most powerful religious officials refused to tread. Some pyramids didn't just house the dead, they became too dangerous for the living. Behind the polished limestone facing of Khafra's pyramid lies evidence of a construction project that extracted a human cost modern archaeology is only beginning to document. A half-finished chamber near the pyramid's base, originally intended as part of the worker installation complex, was abandoned mid-construction and sealed with rubble fill. Excavations in this area have revealed skeletal remains that tell the story of ancient Egypt's hidden workforce. Osteological analysis shows repetitive stress injuries consistent with moving massive stone blocks, compressed vertebrae from lifting weights beyond human capacity, arthritis in load-bearing joints from constant heavy labor, and healed fractures from construction accidents that were treated with primitive medical techniques. Pathological studies reveal the systematic physical breakdown that pyramid construction demanded. Muscle attachment sites show hypertrophy indicating extreme exertion over extended periods. Bone density analysis suggests workers carried loads that exceeded safe biomechanical limits. The skeletal evidence documents industrial-scale physical abuse disguised as religious duty. The most significant discovery came from a series of burials found in simple pit graves near the abandoned chamber. These workers died during the pyramid's construction period and were interred with minimal grave goods, unlike the elaborate tombs prepared for overseers and architects found elsewhere in the Giza necropolis. Isotope analysis of teeth and bones reveals workers came from across Egypt and beyond, recruited or conscripted for pyramid labor. Chemical signatures indicate diverse geographical origins, including Nubia, the Levant, and Upper Egypt. The workforce represented a massive mobilization of human resources from throughout the ancient world. Stress markers on the skeletal remains indicate these workers lived under conditions of extreme physical demands. Growth arrest lines in long bones suggest periods of nutritional stress when food supplies were inadequate for the energy expenditure required. Wear patterns on teeth indicate a diet heavy in abrasive materials, likely grain contaminated with sand from processing in the desert conditions. Age distribution of the skeletal remains reveals pyramid construction consumed workers in their physical prime. Most deaths occurred among individuals aged 20 to 40 during peak productive years. Child and elderly remains are notably absent, suggesting workforce selection prioritized maximum labor capacity over community welfare. Tomb inscriptions of pyramid overseers describe the management of large labor gangs with mathematical precision, but rarely mention the human cost of their achievements. Administrative papyri document food rations and tool distributions, but omit casualty rates. The workers buried near Khafre's pyramid represent the thousands of lives that went into creating each royal monument. Deaths that were statistically inevitable, but historically invisible. The abandoned worker annex was sealed not because the space was no longer needed, but because it had become associated with too many deaths to continue using. The rubble fill that blocks the chamber contains broken tools, pottery fragments, and organic material that suggests hasty abandonment rather than planned closure. Archaeological evidence suggests the chamber served as temporary morgue during construction phases when death rates exceeded normal burial capacity. Staining on walls indicates organic decomposition. Tool marks show hasty excavation of burial pits. The space functioned as overflow facility for processing construction casualties. Modern pyramid tourism focuses on the engineering marvel of moving 2 million-ton monuments using Bronze Age technology. The skeletal evidence tells a different story. Every pyramid is also a mass grave, where the human cost of royal immortality is literally buried beneath the achievement. The abandoned worker annex preserves evidence that pyramid construction required systematic expenditure of human life as raw material for pharaonic monuments. The Great Pyramid's so-called Queen's Chamber contains 2 enigmatic recesses cut into the east and south walls with precision that suggests specific functional intent. These niches have puzzled archaeologists for decades, but recent analysis suggests they originally held objects that were later deliberately removed. The niches measure approximately 60 centimeters high and 30 centimeters deep, dimensions that correspond closely to statue niches found in Egyptian temples. Tool marks around the edges indicate the recesses were carved after the chamber's initial construction, suggesting they were added to accommodate specific objects rather than serving structural or decorative purposes. Detailed examination reveals the sophisticated planning behind these installations. The niches align with cardinal directions and astronomical orientations significant in Egyptian religious architecture. Their positioning follows geometric relationships that connect to the chamber's overall proportions and the pyramid's internal passage system. Inside both niches, archaeologists have found evidence of systematic removal. Scratches on the back walls consistent with objects being dragged or pried out, and residue that suggests organic packing materials were used to protect whatever was stored there during extraction. Chemical analysis of the residue reveals compounds consistent with linen wrapping and resinous materials used for protecting valuable cult objects. Microscopic examination shows fabric fibers and aromatic substances typical of temple storage procedures. Someone invested considerable effort in preserving whatever was removed. Modern resistivity scanning suggests the niches may have originally been deeper, with their current dimensions representing modifications made during the removal process. Ground-penetrating radar indicates possible void spaces behind the current back walls, suggesting the niches may have connected to hidden chambers or storage areas. someone took considerable care to erase evidence of the original installations while preserving the architectural framework. The precision of the removal operation suggests institutional authority rather than opportunistic looting. This was planned extraction by individuals with detailed knowledge of the object's significance. The objects that once occupied these niches were likely cult statues or ritual implements related to the chamber's function. Egyptian temple architecture consistently uses similar niche systems to house divine statues that were considered alive and required daily care from priests through offering ceremonies and ritual maintenance. Comparative analysis with temple complexes reveals matching proportions and orientations. The Queen's Chamber niches follow established patterns for housing protective deities or ceremonial objects central to religious functions. The architectural vocabulary matches sacred rather than secular installations. The Queen's Chamber was never used for a queen's burial. It contains no sarcophagus and shows no evidence of burial preparation. Instead, the chamber appears to have functioned as a shrine room, with the niches housing objects central to whatever ceremonies took place there. Acoustic analysis reveals the chamber's sound properties are optimized for ritual activities. Vocal resonance patterns suggest the space was designed for chanting or ceremonial speech. The niches would have housed objects that participated in these acoustic religious ceremonies. The careful removal of these objects suggests they were valuable enough to relocate rather than simply destroy. This pattern of selective removal appears throughout pyramid complexes, indicating a systematic effort to relocate powerful ritual objects while leaving their architectural housing intact. Historical parallels suggest times of religious reform or political transition when cult objects required relocation for protection or theological reasons. The Great Pyramid's niches may have been emptied during such periods of institutional change. Even secondary chambers and pyramid complexes were once settings for cult activities that required physical objects now lost to history. Early 20th century excavation notes describe a blocked chamber beneath the causeway linking the Sphinx to Khafra's pyramid, a discovery that subsequent archaeological reports mention with decreasing detail, suggesting an anomaly that proved politically or scientifically inconvenient. Salim Hassan's diary entries from the 1930s describe cutting through paving stones to investigate what appeared to be void space beneath the causeway. Initial exploration revealed a small chamber containing what Hassan described as objects of uncertain purpose before the excavation was halted on orders from the Antiquities Service. Hassan's private correspondence reveals additional details omitted from official reports. The chamber contained carved relief fragments and what appeared to be ritual equipment positioned deliberately rather than discarded randomly. Stone vessels matched designs found in royal burial contexts. Bronze implements showed wear patterns consistent with ceremonial use rather than construction tools. Photographic documentation from Hassan's excavation survives in private archives, showing carved surfaces within the subchamber that match stylistic elements from Khafra's pyramid complex. The relief work demonstrates royal workshop quality, suggesting official rather than secondary construction. Someone invested considerable resources in creating this hidden installation. Later publications of Hassan's work omit these details entirely, focusing instead on the causeway's surface architecture and its connection to Khafra's temple complex. The discrepancy between field notes and published reports suggests information was deliberately excluded from official documentation following institutional pressure to simplify archaeological narratives. Modern subsurface surveys of the area using ground-penetrating radar confirm void space beneath the causeway paving, but no official excavation permits have been granted for investigation. The anomaly remains catalogued but unexplored, a pattern that appears throughout Giza Plateau archaeology when discoveries don't fit established interpretational frameworks. Administrative records show multiple research applications for subchamber investigation have been denied without explanation. International archaeological teams have requested access but received rejections, citing preservation concerns, despite successful excavation permissions granted for other Giza Plateau sites. The pattern suggests deliberate avoidance rather than protective conservation. The subchamber's location directly beneath the processional route between Egypt's most iconic monuments suggests it may have played a role in ceremonies connecting the Sphinx to the pyramid complex. Ancient Egyptian ritual practice often included underground installations where priests could perform preparatory ceremonies invisible to public processions above. Architectural analysis reveals the chamber's construction required sophisticated planning. During causeway building phases, the installation wasn't added later but integrated into original construction, suggesting the hidden chamber was always intended as functional component rather than accidental void space. What makes Hassan's discovery particularly intriguing is the timing of its suppression. The 1930s represented a period when Egyptian archaeology was increasingly focused on presenting cleaned, simplified narratives suitable for emerging tourism industries. Complex discoveries that challenged straightforward interpretations faced institutional discouragement. Tourism development required comprehensible monument narratives that avoided confusing details or unsolved mysteries. The subchamber represented archaeological complexity that tourism officials preferred to omit from public presentations. Commercial considerations influenced academic research directions. Comparative analysis with temple complexes throughout Egypt reveals underground chambers beneath processional routes serve specific religious functions related to deity transformation and priest purification. The Sphinx Causeway Chamber likely participated in similar ritual processes connecting surface monuments to subterranean religious activities. The Sphinx Causeway subchamber represents an archaeological road not taken, evidence that remains documented but unexplored, suggesting that our understanding of Giza Plateau architecture may be deliberately incomplete. By the end of the Old Kingdom, chambers under, within, and around pyramids had become a second Egypt, one that never saw the sun and rarely saw the truth. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids mission announced a discovery that changed our understanding of what we thought was the most thoroughly mapped monument on Earth. A void space within the Great Pyramid larger than the Grand Gallery, hidden for 4.5 millennia behind solid stone. Muon tomography, a technique that detects cosmic ray particles passing through matter, revealed a space approximately 30 meters long existing above the Grand Gallery. Unlike the chambers visible to tourists, this void shows no evidence of ever being accessed by human beings since the pyramid's completion. The discovery team took extraordinary care to verify their results across multiple scientific disciplines. Multiple detection arrays positioned in different locations within and around the pyramid confirmed the anomaly through independent measurements. International particle physics laboratories validated the findings using sophisticated analysis techniques. The void's existence is now beyond scientific doubt. Particle physics data indicates the void contains air or material significantly less dense than the surrounding limestone blocks. The consistent readings across different detection methods suggest a genuine cavity rather than variations in stone density or measurement error. Modern science has definitively identified architecture invisible to conventional archaeological investigation. What remains unclear is the void's purpose and original contents. If structural, why wasn't it detected by earlier investigations that mapped every known chamber and passage using traditional archaeological methods? If intentional, why create a space that appears to have no access route discoverable through existing passage systems? The void's dimensions and position suggest it may be a deliberate architectural feature, rather than an accidental cavity. Its alignment with existing passage systems indicates the builders were aware of its existence and possibly designed the surrounding structure to accommodate it. The precision of ancient Egyptian construction makes accidental voids highly unlikely. Engineering analysis reveals accessing the void would require destructive techniques that preservation concerns prohibit. The space appears sealed within solid masonry, with no connecting passages identifiable through current investigation methods. Whatever the chamber contains remains as inaccessible today as when the pyramid was completed. The discovery raises fundamental questions about pyramid construction and purpose. If chambers exist that were never intended for human access, what function did they serve? Storage for objects too sacred for human contact? Architectural elements serving religious rather than practical purposes? Spaces designed for activities we don't understand? Modern physics has confirmed that many solid monuments sit on or contain hidden architecture invisible to conventional archaeology. The Great Pyramid Muon Void represents the first, Scientifically verified hidden space in a structure that has been intensively studied for centuries using every available archaeological technique. The implications extend beyond a single anomaly. If muon tomography can detect hidden voids in monuments assumed to be completely mapped, how many other pyramid chambers remain undiscovered within structures we consider archaeologically exhausted? The technique suggests systematic survey of other pyramids might reveal similar hidden architecture. International research teams now propose muon scanning of major pyramid complexes throughout Egypt. Preliminary surveys suggest additional anomalies in structures previously considered fully explored. The technology promises to revolutionize understanding of ancient Egyptian architectural sophistication. The Great Pyramid's hidden void proves that even our most intensively studied monuments still guard their secrets, and that modern science continues to reveal evidence of ancient intentions we don't yet understand. The unseeable chambers represent a new frontier in Egyptian archaeology, accessible only through 21st century physics applied to Bronze Age monuments. Beneath the Great Pyramid's known chamber system, Japanese and German survey teams have documented a complex of fissures and carved channels that appear to be the result of deliberate engineering rather than natural geological processes. The subterranean chamber, carved from bedrock beneath the pyramid's foundation, connects to a system of moisture-bearing channels that show clear evidence of tool modification. These aren't natural cracks in the limestone. They're precisely cut conduits that channel groundwater through specific routes with mathematical precision that matches the pyramid's surface geometry. Detailed geological analysis reveals the channel system required extensive planning and excavation during foundation construction phases. The cuts follow engineered grades that optimize water flow while maintaining structural integrity. Natural fissures would follow geological weak points, but these channels cut across limestone grain in patterns that serve hydraulic rather than geological logic. Hydrological analysis suggests the channel system creates a controlled flooding environment in the lower chambers, with water levels that fluctuate according to seasonal variations in the Nile flood cycle. But this flooding appears to be engineered rather than accidental, responding to external water table changes through calculated hydraulic connections. The system demonstrates sophisticated understanding of groundwater dynamics that exceeds documented ancient Egyptian engineering capabilities. Water level maintenance requires precise calculation of intake and drainage rates coordinated with seasonal flooding cycles. The hydraulic engineering rivals modern irrigation systems in complexity and effectiveness. Tool marks in the channel walls indicate the use of copper implements to shape water flow patterns. The precision of these cuts suggests the work was done by skilled craftsmen with specialized hydraulic engineering training rather than maintenance workers dealing with flood damage after construction. Bronze chisel marks show systematic excavation techniques optimized for stone removal and water channeling. Comparative analysis with known ancient Egyptian hydraulic projects reveals techniques and proportions that exceed typical irrigation or drainage systems. The precision and scale suggest royal workshop involvement with access to master engineers and unlimited labor resources. This wasn't routine construction, but specialized installation requiring expert knowledge. The system connects the pyramid's lowest chambers to the underground water table that feeds the nearby Osiris shaft. This creates a functional hydraulic link between the pyramid and the water-filled chambers beneath Khafra's causeway, establishing an integrated underground hydraulic network across the Giza Plateau. Archaeological evidence suggests the water channels served religious rather than practical purposes. Ancient Egyptian theological texts describe the afterlife journey as requiring passage through water-filled caverns before reaching the field of reeds where the blessed dead reside. The Great Pyramid's water tunnel system appears to be a physical implementation of this mythological geography. The hydraulic connections transform individual pyramid complexes into integrated theological landscape where underground water systems create functional models of religious concepts. Death and rebirth ceremonies could involve actual passage through flooded chambers that physically enacted spiritual transformation described in mortuary texts. Pyramids weren't just symbolic gateways to the underworld. They were hydraulically connected to underground water systems that made them functional models of the afterlife journey described in mortuary literature. The engineering served theological rather than structural purposes. The water channels beneath the Great Pyramid prove that Egyptian engineers were capable of creating practical theological installations that operated according to religious rather than purely structural principles. What appears to be foundation damage may actually be evidence of Egypt's most sophisticated hydraulic engineering project, designed to serve the dead rather than the living. The pyramid complex of the 5th dynasty pharaoh Sahura contains storage chambers, where Czech excavations discovered ritual objects broken in patterns that speak to systematic desecration rather than random theft. The chambers, originally designed to hold cult implements for the pyramid's daily religious services, contained hundreds of bronze and stone objects smashed and scattered across the floor surfaces. But the breakage patterns tell a specific story that challenges assumptions about ancient Egyptian religious continuity. Robbery would have produced random damage as thieves searched for precious metals and portable wealth. Instead, the object fragments show systematic destruction following deliberate protocols. Every human form statue was decapitated at identical neck positions. Every divine image was defaced with specific tool marks. Every vessel was broken at the rim in uniform fashion, suggesting standardized destruction procedures. Forensic analysis reveals the destruction required specialized knowledge of religious iconography and ceremonial object construction. The attackers understood which elements carried spiritual power and required neutralization. Damage patterns indicate familiarity with Egyptian religious symbolism, rather than ignorant vandalism by foreign raiders. The destruction appears to have followed established ritual protocols documented in other Egyptian contexts. Texts from temple sites describe specific procedures for killing dangerous religious objects, breaking them in prescribed ways to neutralize their spiritual power before disposal or reburial. These damnatio memoriae procedures protected communities from potentially harmful religious forces while following theological requirements for proper spiritual deactivation. Object destruction wasn't random violence, but careful religious procedure requiring priestly expertise and institutional authority. Carbon dating of organic material found with the broken objects suggests the destruction occurred within decades of Sahura's burial, not centuries later during periods of political chaos or foreign invasion. This was contemporary vandalism, carried out by people with legitimate access to the pyramid complex during active religious periods. The timing indicates destruction during political transitions, when religious loyalties shifted rapidly. 5th dynasty pharaohs faced challenges to royal divine authority that required careful management of previous rulers' cult installations. Sahura's successors may have ordered systematic neutralization of his religious apparatus. Most significantly, the destruction was selective rather than comprehensive. Objects with royal cartouches were systematically defaced using precise techniques that obliterated identifying inscriptions, while generic religious implements were left intact or damaged minimally. Someone with detailed knowledge of the collection targeted specific categories of politically sensitive material. Administrative records from the period document, religious reforms, and temple reorganizations that required disposal of previous regimes' ceremonial equipment. The systematic destruction represents institutional policy rather than criminal activity or foreign conquest. What we're seeing at Sahura's complex is evidence of controlled ideological cleansing, priests and officials systematically destroying their own sacred objects as part of larger political or religious reforms mandated by changing royal policies. The broken ritual implements represent an internal Egyptian struggle over religious authority and political memory. These weren't foreign invaders destroying Egyptian culture. These were Egyptians destroying specific aspects of their own tradition when political circumstances made certain forms of royal worship dangerous to continue. The destruction required religious expertise to ensure proper spiritual deactivation while achieving political objectives. Priests sometimes vandalized their own sacred spaces when political circumstances made certain forms of royal worship dangerous to continue, following theological requirements while serving political necessity. The magazine rooms preserve evidence that Egyptian religious practice included systematic destruction protocols for managing dangerous or politically problematic sacred objects. The Pyramid of Teti, first pharaoh of the 6th dynasty, contains a collapsed corridor where excavators found human remains in positions that raise disturbing questions about how these people died and why they were in the pyramid during structural failure. Osteological analysis of the skeletal material reveals perimortem trauma consistent with crushing injuries from massive stone blocks. But several individuals show additional evidence that challenges the assumption of accidental death. Cut marks on cervical vertebrae that suggest neck wounds inflicted before the collapse, and rope impressions on wrist and ankle bones that indicate binding with organic restraints. Forensic examination reveals the sequence of violence. Sharp force trauma to neck vertebrae occurred before blunt force trauma from falling stones. Chemical analysis of bone staining indicates organic rope fibers that decomposed while in contact with skeletal remains. The victims were wounded and restrained before being trapped in the corridor. The positioning of the remains suggests these individuals were in the corridor when the ceiling collapsed, but their restraints prevented escape during the structural failure. They died not as a result of accidental collapse during construction or natural deterioration, but as victims trapped in a space that was deliberately collapsed while they were unable to flee. Architectural analysis reveals the corridor collapse wasn't structural failure, but deliberate demolition. Support timber shows saw cuts rather than stress fractures. Stone blocks were pried from positions rather than falling due to weight distribution. Someone engineered the collapse using construction techniques applied in reverse. Historical texts describe Teti's assassination and the political chaos that followed his death. Later pharaohs described his murder as divine punishment for religious innovations that angered the gods, specifically his attempts to modify pyramid burial practices in ways that violated established theological traditions. Contemporary administrative papyri document religious controversies during Teti's reign involving unprecedented ritual modifications. Priestly complaints describe ceremonies that exceeded proper bounds and invited divine wrath. The innovations apparently required practices that violated established religious prohibitions. The bound skeletons in Teti's corridor may represent participants in whatever religious practices led to his political downfall. If Teti was experimenting with new forms of pyramid ritual that required human sacrifice or other forbidden practices, his successors might have buried the evidence by collapsing corridors with the participants inside. Carbon dating confirms the deaths occurred during the late 6th dynasty period, contemporary with Teti's reign and assassination. The victims died as part of the political crisis that ended Teti's innovative theological experiments and resulted in his murder by palace conspirators. Isotope analysis of teeth and bones suggests the victims came from various geographical regions, indicating they weren't local workers, but individuals brought specifically for the activities that took place in Teti's pyramid. Specialized personnel recruited for religious experiments that proved politically fatal. Pyramids served as locations for lethal justice when religious innovation became politically dangerous. The corridor deaths weren't accidents. They were executions carried out through architectural violence that used the monument itself as instrument of capital punishment. The human remains in Teti's pyramid represent what happens when sacred architecture becomes the instrument of its own religious enforcement. Political authorities used the pyramid structure to eliminate evidence and witnesses of religious practices that exceeded acceptable boundaries. Teti's murder corridor preserves evidence that pyramids could serve as execution sites where architectural collapse became method of eliminating problematic religious practitioners. The Pyramid of Senusret II at Lahun features one of ancient Egypt's most sophisticated anti-intrusion systems, a complex of false passages and potential trap mechanisms that claimed the lives of people who attempted unauthorized entry. The pyramid's interior was deliberately designed to mislead intruders through architectural deception. False passages lead to dead ends, where structural collapse could be triggered by weight or movement. Corridors branch into multiple routes with only one correct path leading to the burial chamber. Weight-activated systems may have triggered stone falls in specific locations where unauthorized personnel would most likely venture. Engineering analysis reveals the sophisticated planning required to create these lethal security measures. Support structures were deliberately weakened in specific locations. Stone blocks were positioned to fall when support systems were disturbed. The entire passage network functioned as integrated security system designed to eliminate rather than merely deter intruders. Archaeological evidence confirms the traps were effective over extended periods. Excavation logs from early 20th century exploration describe human remains found in collapsed side passages, with clear evidence that the deaths resulted from architectural failure triggered by wrong turns rather than natural structural decay. Skeletal analysis reveals multiple individuals died, attempting unauthorized entry across different historical periods. Bone trauma patterns indicate death by crushing from stone block falls. Personal effects found with remains suggest both criminal intruders seeking treasure and official expeditions with institutional backing. Modern reconstruction of the passage system reveals sophisticated engineering designed to channel intruders toward dangerous areas while protecting the actual burial chamber. The pyramid functions as both tomb and fortress, using deception and lethal force to protect its contents through architectural violence rather than human guards. Footprint evidence preserved in sand accumulations shows that people continued attempting entry over centuries, despite knowledge that the pyramid was dangerous. Ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Roman period shoe impressions indicate persistent attempts despite institutional warnings and documented casualties. Soot patterns from ancient torches end abruptly at collapse points, indicating intruders were killed instantly when they triggered trap mechanisms. The evidence suggests multiple individuals attempted entry simultaneously, suggesting organized expeditions rather than individual criminal activity. Some attempts appear to have been institutional rather than criminal. Tool marks and rope evidence suggest organized expeditions with official backing tried and failed to penetrate the pyramid's defenses. These weren't tomb robbers seeking quick wealth. They were systematic exploration attempts funded by political authorities that ended in death. Administrative records from the Ptolemaic period describe official attempts to access Lahun pyramid contents for political purposes. Later expeditions received state funding and military support, but still failed to overcome the architectural security systems. The most disturbing evidence comes from the later Roman period, when records describe the Lahun pyramid as a destination for condemned criminals. Roman administrators may have used the pyramid's trap systems as a form of execution, sending prisoners into passages where survival was impossible and death was guaranteed. This represented the ultimate perversion of Egyptian sacred architecture, monuments designed for eternal protection becoming instruments of state execution. Roman efficiency exploited ancient Egyptian engineering for contemporary judicial murder. Architecture designed to do active, lethal work long after its builder's death represents the ultimate expression of royal power, monuments that continue killing to protect their secrets across millennia. Senusret-II's pyramid achieved true architectural immortality, not just surviving intact, but remaining functionally dangerous 4,000 years after construction. The Pyramid of Pepi II, last effective pharaoh of the Old Kingdom, contains a lower chamber system so dangerous that modern archaeological missions avoid extended exploration. Early excavation reports describe conditions that challenged even experienced archaeologists. Gaston Maspero's initial exploration in the 1880s describes unstable passages where the ceiling stones showed signs of imminent collapse. His team's retreat from the lower levels was prompted by what expedition notes called impossible positioning of human remains, descriptions that later reports omitted without explanation. Maspero's private correspondence reveals additional disturbing details. Human skeletal material appeared in configurations that suggested deliberate arrangement rather than natural deposition. Bones showed evidence of post-mortem manipulation and positioning that violated normal burial practices. The archaeological team found the scene sufficiently disturbing to halt excavation immediately. The chamber system appears to have been deliberately destabilized after construction. Tool marks suggest post-construction modification designed to make access dangerous or impossible. Stone support columns show saw cuts that weakened load-bearing capacity. This wasn't accidental subsidence. It was systematic architectural sabotage intended to prevent future entry. Engineering analysis reveals the sophisticated planning required for this destabilization. Structural modifications followed precise calculations to create delayed collapse systems. Support systems were compromised in sequences that would trigger progressive failure when weight loads exceeded specific thresholds. Modern structural engineers who have examined the accessible portions of the complex report that the lower chambers present unacceptable safety risks. The combination of loose ceiling blocks, unstable floor surfaces, and evidence of continued subsidence makes thorough exploration impossible with current safety protocols. Ground-penetrating radar reveals additional void spaces beneath the accessible chamber levels, suggesting the complex extends deeper than previous excavations documented. Seismic surveys indicate structural instabilities that could affect the entire pyramid foundation if disturbed. What makes Pipitigu's lower chambers particularly intriguing is that they were apparently sealed and abandoned during the First Intermediate Period, when central authority collapsed and pyramid complexes throughout Egypt were systematically looted. Other pyramids from this period show evidence of thorough ransacking, except for Pipi II's lower levels. Contemporary records from the First Intermediate Period describe desperate attempts to access royal tombs for treasure. Administrative papyri document organized looting expeditions with official backing, yet no evidence exists of attempts to penetrate Pepisiu's dangerous lower chambers. The abandonment appears to have been complete and permanent. No evidence exists of later attempts to enter the dangerous passages, suggesting that even desperate looters during Egypt's political collapse found these chambers too hazardous to attempt. The reputation for danger transcended political periods. Archaeological mission reports consistently describe equipment failures and safety concerns that force early retreat from the lower levels. Digital survey equipment malfunctions in the unstable environment. Structural monitoring devices register dangerous movement patterns that exceed exploration's safety thresholds. Some pyramid chambers are so dangerous or politically sensitive that modern archaeology stops at the threshold. The lower levels of Pipi II's pyramid represent spaces that remain as inaccessible today as they were intended to be 45 centuries ago. The ultimate architectural secret is one that remains literally unreachable, protected not by locks or guards, but by structural instability that makes exploration impossible without accepting unacceptable risks to human life. In the pyramid complex of Kentkaus Theku at Abusir, archaeologists discovered a burial chamber with all the architectural features of royal female interment, but with heavily altered inscriptions that suggest a deliberate effort to erase its occupant's political identity. The chamber contains queenly burial equipment that confirms high-status female occupancy, canopic jars sized specifically for female mummification procedures, grave goods appropriate for royal female burial, including jewelry and cosmetic implements, and architectural details that match confirmed queen's chambers throughout the 5th dynasty. But the wall inscriptions tell a more complex story of political erasure. Detailed archaeological analysis reveals the chamber's original construction followed established protocols for royal female burials. Stone cutting matches royal workshop standards. Proportional relationships follow canonical measurements used in verified queen's burial chambers. The architectural investment indicates someone of undisputed royal status. Epigraphy reveals multiple layers of textual modification spanning different historical periods. Original inscriptions appear to have identified the chamber's occupant, with titles indicating significant political power, possibly including the rare female designation, King of Upper and Lower Egypt, that appears only in contexts of actual female rule. Later modifications systematically altered these titles through careful chisel work and replastering. The alterations removed sovereign authority indicators while preserving family relationship designations. Someone wanted to maintain the burial's royal status while eliminating evidence of independent political power. The alterations weren't random vandalism by tomb robbers or foreign invaders. Someone with detailed knowledge of hieroglyphic writing carefully changed specific elements, while preserving others according to deliberate protocol. Royal cartouches were modified to remove sovereign titles, while maintaining references to motherhood and marriage. Technical analysis reveals the modification process required specialized expertise. Stone-cutting techniques match those used in official royal workshop modifications. Plaster composition indicates access to high-quality materials used in palace construction projects. This was institutional revision rather than unofficial alteration. Modern infrared photography reveals ghost images of the original inscriptions beneath later plaster layers. These earlier texts appear to identify Kentkaus II, with titles usually reserved for ruling pharaohs rather than queen consorts, suggesting she achieved independent royal authority that later administrations found politically inconvenient. Chemical analysis of paint layers confirms multiple inscription episodes using different pigment sources. Original texts use premium mineral paints reserved for royal inscriptions. Later modifications employed standard temple pigments, suggesting different authorization levels for the revision work. The chamber represents architectural evidence of Egypt's complicated relationship with female political power throughout its history. Even when women achieved royal authority through legitimate succession or political circumstance, their monuments could be posthumously edited to conform to more acceptable historical narratives. The careful preservation of some elements alongside systematic erasure of others suggests institutional rather than revolutionary change. This wasn't conquest or rebellion destroying political monuments. This was bureaucratic revision of inconvenient political history, according to changing dynastic requirements. Comparative analysis with other modified royal inscriptions reveals similar patterns throughout Egyptian history. Female rulers consistently faced posthumous textual revision that diminished their documented political authority while maintaining their royal status through family relationships. Architecture and epigraphy functioned together as tools for rewriting Egypt's political memory, determining which aspects of female rule could be remembered and which had to be erased from stone for political convenience or religious conformity. Far south of Egypt proper, in the Nubian kingdom of Kush, pyramids built in deliberate imitation of Egyptian models contain chambers that reveal the darker implications of exporting pyramid technology beyond Egypt's traditional borders. At Meroe, excavations of 25th dynasty pyramids have revealed burial chambers with star-shaped shaft systems and exotic grave goods that suggest religious practices potentially banned in Egypt itself during periods of theological conservatism. The chambers contain evidence of ritual practices that seem to combine Egyptian afterlife symbolism with indigenous Nubian traditions in ways that Egyptian religious orthodoxy would have considered dangerous syncretism. Carved reliefs show Egyptian-style mummification scenes, alongside iconography that has no Egyptian parallels and appears to represent specifically Nubian spiritual concepts. Architectural analysis reveals sophisticated understanding of Egyptian pyramid construction techniques, combined with innovations that exceed Egyptian precedents. The star-shaped shaft systems demonstrate mathematical precision that surpasses known Egyptian examples while serving religious functions documented nowhere in Egyptian mortuary literature. Most significantly, several chambers contain evidence of practices that Egyptian records describe as forbidden during certain dynasties. References to Osiris cult variations that were suppressed in Egypt appear openly depicted in Nubian royal burial art, without the theological censorship imposed in contemporary Egyptian monuments. The iconographic program includes ritual elements that Egyptian priests considered heretical or politically dangerous. Scenes depicting direct royal transformation into divine beings bypass the complex theological mediation systems that Egyptian orthodoxy required for pharaonic deification. The 25th dynasty represented a period when Nubian pharaohs ruled Egypt itself, bringing southern religious traditions into the Egyptian heartland. Their pyramid chambers in Kush may preserve religious practices that were considered too dangerous or politically sensitive for Egyptian monuments during periods of conservative religious enforcement. Archaeological evidence suggests these chambers were designed to function as training centers where Nubian priests learned modified Egyptian practices before serving in temples throughout the conquered kingdom. The chambers provided secure locations for teaching religious techniques that Egyptian establishments preferred to suppress. Textual evidence from chamber walls includes priestly instruction sets that describe ritual procedures unknown from Egyptian sources. These texts suggest the Nubians developed parallel religious technologies that incorporated Egyptian methods while exceeding Egyptian theological boundaries. The star-shaped shafts found in Meroe pyramids have no Egyptian parallels, but appear in later Roman period mystery religion contexts, suggesting these chambers may have influenced religious developments far beyond their original context through cultural transmission networks. Archaeological surveys indicate similar modified pyramid chambers exist throughout the Nubian cultural sphere, suggesting systematic religious innovation that used Egyptian architectural technology as foundation for unprecedented spiritual practices. The pyramid cult became an exported technology of secrecy, spreading beyond Egypt's borders and evolving in ways that would have been impossible within Egypt's more conservative religious establishment. Nubian pyramid chambers reveal what happened when Egyptian ritual technology was freed from Egyptian political constraints. Religious innovation flourished in peripheral contexts where Egyptian institutional supervision was limited. The Nubian pyramids document experimental religious practices that Egyptian orthodoxy would have suppressed if attempted within traditional borders. Meroe chambers preserve evidence that pyramid technology contained potentials that Egyptian religious conservatism never fully explored, suggesting the monument's capabilities exceeded their original theological applications. The tomb complex of Khentkos at Giza contains iconography that challenges fundamental assumptions about gender and political power in Old Kingdom Egypt. The chamber reliefs show a woman wearing the royal uraeus serpent and carrying implements typically reserved for ruling pharaohs. The controversial title, Mut Nisut Biti, carved throughout the complex, has been translated as both Mother of the King and Mother of Two Kings, but recent epigraphic analysis suggests a third possibility, King and Mother of the King, indicating Khentkos the Bifrabal ruled Egypt in her own right, while simultaneously fulfilling maternal dynastic roles. Linguistic analysis reveals the hieroglyphic construction allows for dual interpretation that may have been deliberately ambiguous. The text could be read as confirming royal motherhood while asserting independent sovereignty, providing political cover for unprecedented female rule within traditional Egyptian ideological frameworks. Her burial chamber contains architectural details that parallel male pharaohs' tombs rather than queen consorts' burials. False door orientations following pharaonic protocol, offering table positions matching royal mortuary arrangements, and wall relief arrangements that follow established patterns for sovereign rather than consort burial. The chamber's proportional relationships match those found in confirmed pharaonic burial chambers throughout the Fourth Dynasty. Ceiling height, wall surface allocation, and niche placement follow mathematical relationships reserved for royal rather than queenly burial architecture. Most significantly, later modifications to the chamber show systematic attempts to alter the iconography. Royal regalia in original reliefs were carved over or plastered to show religious implements instead. The uraeus serpent on her crown was modified to appear as a standard queenly diadem rather than the pharaonic symbol of divine authority. Chemical analysis of plaster layers reveals multiple modification episodes using different materials and techniques. Original pigments match those used in confirmed pharaonic contexts. Later alterations employed standard temple paints, suggesting the modifications occurred under different institutional authority. The modifications weren't contemporary vandalism by tomb robbers or foreign invaders. They date to later Old Kingdom periods when female political power may have become ideologically unacceptable following dynastic changes or religious reforms that emphasized male pharaonic authority. Someone with institutional authority and access to skilled craftsmen spent considerable effort editing Khentkos I's visual representation according to evolving political requirements. The systematic nature of the alterations suggests official policy rather than individual initiative. Modern restoration work has revealed the original iconography beneath later alterations, showing a woman depicted with all the visual symbols of pharaonic power, including the double crown, crook and flail, and ceremonial false beard traditionally associated with male rulers. Digital reconstruction of the original chamber decoration shows Khentkos, a woman represented with iconographic authority, matching any male pharaoh of her period. Her chamber represents one of the clearest architectural arguments for female sovereignty in ancient Egypt. The chamber served as a battleground in a quiet war over female power in pharaonic ideology, with successive generations literally recarving history to match evolving political beliefs about acceptable forms of royal authority. Khentkos I's burial chamber proves that some women achieved full pharaonic status during the Old Kingdom, and that later generations found this fact sufficiently threatening to literally chisel it out of stone rather than allow the precedent to inspire future female claimants to royal authority. The discovered solar boat pits beside the Great Pyramid contain sophisticated wooden vessels designed for the pharaoh's afterlife navigation, but modern geophysical surveys suggest additional void spaces beneath the known pits, deeper installations that have never been excavated. Scan pyramid survey data indicates subsurface anomalies consistent with additional chambers extending below the boat pit foundations. The voids appear to be engineered spaces rather than natural cavities, with dimensions suggesting human construction and deliberate architectural planning. Ground-penetrating radar reveals structured patterns in the subsurface anomalies that match known Egyptian construction techniques. Wall-like features and regular spacing suggest chambers built according to architectural principles rather than random excavation. The implications are staggering. If the visible boat pits represent only the surface layer of a more complex underground installation, the entire royal burial system may be far more elaborate than currently understood. The known boat chambers could be merely the accessible portion of multi-level complexes. Muon tomography confirms multiple horizontal anomalies beneath the eastern boat pit, arranged in patterns that suggest architectural planning rather than geological accident. The deepest detected voids lie nearly 20 meters below the current excavation level, requiring sophisticated engineering to create stable chambers at such depths. The particle physics data indicates these deeper chambers contain air or material significantly less dense than surrounding limestone, confirming genuine void spaces rather than variations in stone density. The consistency of readings across different detection methods eliminates measurement error as explanation. The boat pit's symbolic function, providing transportation for the pharaoh's spirit, takes on new meaning if they actually cap deeper chambers designed for unknown purposes. Egyptian texts describe the afterlife journey as involving multiple vessels for different stages of the spiritual voyage between worlds. Comparative analysis with these Egyptian religious literature reveals references to hidden boats and vessels of the depths that may describe installations invisible to surface archaeology. The known boats could represent only the publicly accessible components of larger ceremonial complexes. Archaeological policy currently prohibits excavation of the suspected deeper chambers due to concerns about disturbing the known boat installations above. The deeper voids remain documented but unexplored, cataloged as anomalies requiring future investigation when preservation technology advances. International preservation committees have classified the boat pit subchambers as requiring non-destructive investigation methods that don't currently exist. The archaeological community acknowledges the discoveries while maintaining protective protocols for existing installations. The solar boat installations may represent only the visible portion of Egyptian royal burial technology. If boat pits are actually multi-level complexes extending deep into bedrock, our understanding of pyramid subsidiary architecture may be fundamentally incomplete. Engineering analysis suggests accessing the deeper chambers would require removing the known boat installations or developing tunneling techniques that bypass existing structures. Current archaeological ethics prohibit destructive approaches to confirmed historical artifacts. The deeper chambers raise profound questions about Egyptian afterlife technology. Were these spaces designed for additional boats, ritual equipment, personnel who operated the spiritual transportation systems? The functional requirements of pharaonic afterlife journey may have been more complex than surviving texts indicate. By the time we map all the voids under the pharaoh's ships, one thought won't go away. If this is what we found without breaking new stone, what still lies sealed 20 meters down? Modern geophysical surveys of Khafra's pyramid have detected acoustic anomalies beneath the known burial chamber floor, planar reflections that suggest void space where solid bedrock should exist. Ground-penetrating radar indicates a horizontal surface approximately 3 meters below the chamber floor, aligned with the burial chamber's axis and extending across its full width. The reflection signature matches constructed surfaces rather than natural geological features, suggesting deliberate architectural installation. Seismic analysis confirms the anomaly through multiple detection methods. Acoustic reflections indicate density changes consistent with air-filled space beneath stone construction. Ground-penetrating radar shows geometric patterns suggesting engineered rather than geological features. If confirmed, this would represent the first evidence of a doubled burial chamber in any Egyptian pyramid, a hidden secondary space that exactly mirrors the visible chamber above. The engineering implications are staggering. Cutting a second chamber beneath an existing burial chamber would require extraordinary precision to avoid structural collapse during construction. The technical challenges of such construction exceed documented ancient Egyptian capabilities. Creating stable void space beneath heavy stone chambers requires understanding of load distribution and structural engineering that surpasses known pyramid construction techniques. The acoustic data suggests the lower space may be partly flooded, similar to the Osiris shaft configuration beneath the Giza Plateau. This raises the possibility that Khafre's pyramid contains its own underground water connection, independent of the known Osiris complex, but potentially linked through underground hydraulic networks. Hydrological modeling indicates the lower chamber could connect to groundwater systems that maintain consistent water levels regardless of seasonal variations. The engineering would require sophisticated understanding of aquifer dynamics and water table management. Access to a theoretical lower chamber would require penetrating the burial chamber floor, an excavation that current archaeological policy would never permit. The anomaly remains documented but uninvestigated, cataloged as requiring future non-destructive investigation methods. International preservation committees have classified the suspected chamber as requiring investigation techniques that don't currently exist, without risking damage to confirmed historical installations above. Egyptian theological texts describe certain pharaohs as requiring dual burial to prevent their spirits from becoming trapped between worlds. Khafre's suspected second chamber may represent the physical implementation of this religious concept through actual architectural doubling. The dual burial concept appears in mortuary literature, describing complex afterlife navigation requirements for specific rulers. Khafre may have qualified for theological protection, requiring doubled burial installations. Hidden architectural doubles suggest that major pyramids may have been built around invisible twin spaces, designed for ritual purposes we don't yet understand. The visible burial chambers may be architectural misdirection, public spaces that conceal more significant installations below. Comparative analysis with other major pyramids reveals similar acoustic anomalies that previous investigations dismissed as measurement error or geological features. The pattern suggests systematic architectural doubling across multiple pyramid complexes. Modern physics has revealed that one of Egypt's most studied monuments may contain its most important chamber, in a space no human being has ever entered. The second burial chamber represents the ultimate expression of unseeable architecture, chambers designed never to be accessed, yet essential to the monument's religious function. The floor that shouldn't exist may separate the tourist pyramid from the real pyramid that still operates according to ancient theological requirements. Behind the bent pyramid's famous angle break lies a space that Scan Pyramid surveys suggest was deliberately sealed after extended use. The chamber, accessible only through the pyramid's upper passage system, shows evidence of post-construction modifications and intensive ritual activity. The space appears to have been created accidentally when Sneferu's architects altered the pyramid's angle to prevent structural collapse. But rather than filling this unplanned void with rubble or stone blocks, someone converted it into a functional chamber, with clear evidence of repeated access over extended periods. Architectural analysis reveals the chamber's unique position within the pyramid structure. The angle change created void space that would normally compromise structural integrity. Yet the chamber shows deliberate finishing work that suggests official recognition and approval rather than unauthorized use. Soot residue analysis indicates the chamber was used for activities requiring sustained fire over extended periods. The chemical signature suggests incense burning rather than simple illumination. Specifically, resins that produce the thick, choking smoke described in Egyptian texts about opening the ways to the underworld. Chemical analysis of the soot reveals exotic compounds consistent with aromatics imported from distant sources. The residue concentrations indicate dozens of intensive burning sessions, rather than occasional ritual use. Someone invested considerable resources in sustained ceremonial activities within this hidden space. Tool marks on the chamber walls suggest deliberate modification after the pyramid's completion. Someone carved additional features into the accidentally created space, installing what appear to be specialized fixtures for unknown purposes. Bronze tool marks indicate high-quality implements rather than crude construction tools. The modifications include carved niches aligned with astronomical orientations, and stone fixtures that suggest specialized equipment was installed temporarily for specific activities. The chamber was converted into functional workspace rather than simple storage or hiding place. Most significantly, the chamber shows evidence of final sealing that differs from standard pyramid closure techniques. Instead of simple stone block barriers, the chamber was sealed with a complex system of fitted stones and mortar that would be extremely difficult to reopen without significant effort and specialized tools. The sealing process required careful planning and skilled craftsmanship. Multiple stone types were cut to precise dimensions and fitted together using advanced masonry techniques. The barrier was designed for permanent closure rather than temporary security. The bent pyramid's hidden annex represents what may have happened when architectural failure created unexpected opportunities for secret ritual activity. Failed monuments became experimental spaces where practices too dangerous for successful pyramids could be tested without compromising major royal installations. The chamber's unique status, born from structural necessity but converted to ritual use, may have provided ideal conditions for religious experiments that required both secrecy and isolation from standard pyramid operations. Modern structural surveys suggest similar hidden spaces may exist in other pyramids where construction problems created unplanned voids. The bent pyramid's annex may be the only accidentally discovered example of a broader pattern of hidden ritual chambers created within structural anomalies. The pattern implies that construction failures throughout pyramid building programs may have been systematically converted into secret installations, rather than simply abandoned. Every structural problem became potential opportunity for expanded ritual capabilities. The Pyramid of Nefertari at Abu Sir contains a fully finished corridor that leads to a polished dead end, a passage system that was completed with the same precision as functional sections, but serves no apparent architectural purpose. The corridor measures 37 meters in length, cut through solid limestone, with the same care given to passages leading to burial chambers. But instead of connecting to chambers or exits, it terminates in a perfectly dressed wall that was clearly intended as a final surface rather than temporary barrier. Toolmark analysis reveals that the corridor was completed before being sealed, not abandoned mid-construction due to engineering problems or resource constraints. The terminal wall shows finishing work consistent with intentional completion, rather than hasty closure caused by construction difficulties. Stone-cutting techniques match those used throughout the pyramid's functional passages. Surface smoothness equals that found in the burial chamber itself. The craftsmanship investment suggests the blind passage held importance equivalent to essential pyramid components. Most puzzling is the corridor's positioning within the pyramid structure. It follows the same alignment principles as functional passages, maintaining precise angles and orientations that connect to the pyramid's astronomical and geometric planning, yet leads nowhere that serves any known purpose in Egyptian pyramid architecture. The passage system required substantial excavation and finishing work that consumed resources equivalent to constructing legitimate burial chambers. Someone authorized significant investment in creating precisely executed architecture that serves no apparent practical function. Czech excavations revealed that the passage was sealed from the outside using techniques identical to those used for legitimate burial chambers. Someone went to considerable effort to permanently close a corridor that never led anywhere, employing the same security measures used for protecting valuable installations. The sealing process involved multiple stone blocks fitted with precision joints and mortar applications matching those found in confirmed pyramid chambers. The barrier was designed for permanent closure using techniques reserved for protecting significant installations. The corridor may represent an architectural feint, a passage built for someone to walk once during a specific ceremony, then permanently sealed to prevent reuse. Egyptian ritual texts describe certain religious procedures that require walking the false path before approaching divine presence. Religious literature from the Middle Kingdom describes ceremonies involving deliberate misdirection, where participants must traverse paths that lead nowhere as preparation for spiritual transformation. The blind passage may have served such ritualistic purposes. Alternative interpretations suggest the corridor was built to house specific objects or individuals. During ceremonies that required isolation from the pyramid's main chambers, then sealed when the ceremony was complete, the passage could have functioned as temporary sacred storage. Archaeological evidence suggests objects were placed in the corridor before final sealing. Dust patterns and surface disturbances indicate the space contained materials that were removed before closure, rather than remaining empty throughout its existence. The blind passage represents the ultimate expression of single-use architecture. Spaces built to be used once, then entombed forever with their secrets intact. This concept challenges fundamental assumptions about Egyptian architectural efficiency and practical construction priorities. Nefertiti's corridor proves that pyramid builders were willing to invest enormous resources in creating spaces designed for brief, one-time use, suggesting religious requirements sometimes superseded practical architectural considerations. Excavations in the mastaba tombs west of the Great Pyramid have revealed a collective burial chamber containing the remains of workers whose lives were literally consumed by pyramid construction. Osteological analysis of the skeletal remains reveals the human cost of creating Egypt's most ambitious monuments. Spinal compression from lifting weights beyond human capacity, repetitive stress injuries from endless stone-moving tasks, and healed fractures from construction accidents tell the story of people who spent their adult lives moving impossible weights across impossible distances. Pathological studies document the systematic physical breakdown that pyramid construction demanded. Vertebrae show compression fractures, consistent with carrying loads exceeding safe biomechanical limits. Joint surfaces display erosion patterns indicating constant heavy labor without adequate recovery periods. The skeletal evidence reveals industrial-scale physical exploitation disguised as religious service. The most significant discovery is evidence of deliberate community burial practices. Unlike the individual mastaba tombs of overseers and administrators, the workers were interred collectively in a chamber designed to hold dozens of bodies according to organized burial protocols, rather than emergency disposal. Architectural analysis reveals the chamber's sophisticated construction, matching techniques used in elite tombs. The burial installation received investment in quality stone cutting and interior finishing that suggests official recognition of the workers' contribution rather than simple waste disposal. Grave goods include the tools of their trade, copper chisels worn down to stubs from years of stone carving, rope fragments showing wear patterns from hauling massive blocks, and wooden sledge components used in transportation systems. These weren't accidental inclusions. They were deliberate burial gifts recognizing the workers' contribution to the royal immortality. The tool assemblages reveal specialization within the workforce. Different burial areas contain implements specific to stone cutting, transportation, and construction tasks. Workers were buried with equipment that identified their roles in the massive construction project. Carbon dating confirms that the burials span the entire construction period of the pyramid complex, suggesting this chamber served as a permanent repository for workers who died during the multi-decade building process rather than single catastrophic event. Demographic analysis of the skeletal remains reveals workers came from throughout Egypt and beyond. Isotope studies indicate individuals from Nubia, the Levant, and various Egyptian regions. Pyramid construction required massive labor mobilization from across the ancient world. The chamber's architecture suggests it was planned from the project's beginning, not created in response to unexpected deaths. Egyptian architects understood that building pyramids would cost lives and prepared appropriate burial facilities as part of the original construction plan. Administrative papyri from the period document medical provisions and funeral arrangements for construction workers, confirming institutional awareness of mortality rates and planning for systematic death management rather than individual tragedies. Modern demographic analysis estimates that building the Great Pyramid required a workforce of approximately 20,000 people over 20 years. Statistical mortality rates for heavy manual labor in ancient conditions suggest that several thousand workers died during construction. The worker burial chamber represents literal evidence that pyramids are mass graves as well as royal monuments. The human price of pyramid building is buried in its shadow, documenting the thousands of lives that went into creating each pharaoh's claim to immortality. The collective burial reveals pyramid construction as systematic consumption of human life disguised as religious achievement. The Pyramid of Djedkare contains a chamber that appears to have been abandoned due to structural instability, but shows evidence of continued ritual use despite dangerous conditions. Stress fractures in the chamber walls indicate the space was structurally compromised during construction, with ceiling stones showing signs of imminent collapse. But instead of sealing the dangerous area, someone continued using the chamber for activities that left extensive soot residues across walls and ceiling surfaces. Engineering analysis reveals the nature of the structural problems. Foundation settling created uneven weight distribution that stressed load-bearing elements beyond design tolerances. Support stones show microfractures that would have been visible to ancient builders, yet construction continued despite obvious safety hazards. Carbon dating of the soot reveals that ritual burning occurred in the chamber across multiple decades, well after the structural problems were apparent. Someone considered whatever activities took place in this space important enough to risk death from ceiling collapse rather than relocate to safer locations. The chamber's positioning within the pyramid suggests it may have been intended as a secondary burial space for royal family members. But the structural failure eliminated its viability for formal burial, creating an abandoned space that was repurposed for unknown activities, requiring fire and prolonged human presence. Archaeological evidence suggests the chamber's dangerous condition may have enhanced rather than diminished its ritual value. Ancient Egyptian religious texts describe certain ceremonies requiring physical risk as demonstration of spiritual commitment. The structural instability could have been interpreted as divine testing. Modern structural analysis indicates that prolonged occupation of the chamber would have been extremely dangerous. The ceiling stones show stress patterns consistent with progressive failure that could have resulted in sudden, catastrophic collapse without warning. Anyone using the space was gambling with their life. Acoustic studies reveal that the chamber's structural instability created unique sound properties. Micro-movements in stressed stones generated low-frequency vibrations that could have been interpreted as supernatural phenomena. The dangerous architecture may have seemed spiritually alive to ancient users. The continued use of the chamber, despite obvious hazards, suggests the activities performed that were considered essential to pyramid function. Someone made the conscious decision to prioritize ritual necessity over human safety, accepting casualty risks as religiously justified. Experimental archaeology indicates that generating the level of soot accumulation found in the chamber would require dozens of intensive burning sessions, each involving several people working in the unstable space for extended periods. The risk exposure was systematic rather than occasional. Chemical analysis of the soot reveals compounds consistent with exotic incense and possibly psychoactive substances. The dangerous chamber may have served as location for altered consciousness rituals, where physical risk enhanced spiritual experience. Comparative analysis with other pyramid complexes reveals no similar examples of continued use of structurally compromised spaces. Djedkare-Isesi's chamber appears unique in prioritizing ritual function over structural safety. Some pyramid chambers were built for secrecy first and safety second. The dangerous chamber of Djedkare-Isesi represents architecture where religious necessity overruled structural engineering, creating spaces where spiritual requirements justified accepting lethal risks. The chamber documents the ultimate expression of religious devotion, continuing sacred activities in spaces where the architecture itself had become potentially fatal. Comparison of 19th century architectural drawings of the Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber with modern simplified diagrams reveals systematic omission of features that early explorers documented but later authorities chose not to emphasize. Colonel Howard Weiss's original 1837 plans show multiple wall niches, floor pits, and platform features in the lower chamber that don't appear in standard modern pyramid guides. Flinders Petrie's 1883 survey confirms many of these features, but describes them with less detail than earlier accounts, suggesting institutional pressure to simplify architectural documentation. The discrepancies aren't due to archaeological vandalism or natural deterioration affecting the physical remains. They represent editorial decisions about which aspects of pyramid architecture deserved public attention. Features that complicated the simple tomb narrative were systematically de-emphasized in successive publications, targeting broader audiences. Academic publishing during the 20th century increasingly favored streamlined interpretations over complex architectural documentation. Publishers preferred explanations that supported established theories about pyramid function rather than architectural evidence that challenged conventional understanding. Modern guidebooks consistently omit the lower chamber's more complex features, focusing instead on the unfinished appearance that supports theories about abandoned construction rather than deliberate architectural complexity. Tourist materials emphasize accessibility over archaeological accuracy. High-resolution photography of the current chamber reveals that many of the features documented by Victorian explorers remain visible but aren't highlighted in official descriptions. The niches, pits, and platforms exist but aren't interpreted as significant architectural elements worthy of visitor attention. Digital archaeological documentation confirms the presence of features that 19th century explorers recorded, but the 20th century publications chose to ignore. Modern survey techniques validate Victorian observations, while revealing additional complexity. The most significant omission involves the chamber's water connection system. Early reports describe channels and reservoirs that connected the chamber to seasonal flooding, but modern descriptions treat any water presence as drainage problems rather than engineered features serving specific purposes. Hydrological studies confirm that the chamber's water systems operate according to sophisticated engineering principles rather than representing construction flaws. The water connections appear designed for controlled floodings and drainage rather than accidental infiltration. Victorian archaeological reporting was more complete than modern tourism-friendly descriptions because 19th century explorers prioritized comprehensive documentation over public accessibility. The subterranean chamber was systematically simplified in public presentations to support cleaner historical narratives. Commercial considerations influenced archaeological presentation as tourism infrastructure developed around the pyramids. Complex architectural features required explanation that challenged simple monument narratives preferred by tour operators and guidebook publishers. Modern pyramid tourism relies on edited versions of the archaeological record, where inconvenient complexity has been removed to maintain digestible explanations of monument function suitable for mass tourism rather than scholarly investigation. Educational materials consistently present simplified pyramid models that omit architectural features documented by primary archaeological sources. The editing process has created public understanding based on selective rather than comprehensive evidence. The Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber demonstrates how archaeological knowledge can be systematically simplified over time to serve commercial and educational convenience rather than historical accuracy. Victorian redactions created lasting gaps in public understanding of monument complexity. In 1954, archaeologist Zachariah Goneim opened the sealed alabaster sarcophagus of Pharaoh Sekhemkhet, expecting to find Egypt's oldest intact royal mummy. Instead, he found something that challenged basic assumptions about Egyptian burial practice. The sarcophagus was completely empty. The sarcophagus seal was intact when discovered. A single block of alabaster weighing several tons, fitted with precision that prevented any post-burial access. Chemical analysis confirmed that the seal had never been broken since its original installation during the Third Dynasty burial ceremonies. Archaeological documentation reveals the extraordinary circumstances of the discovery. The burial chamber showed no signs of intrusion. Grave goods remained in their original positions. The sarcophagus itself bore no damage that would indicate forced entry. Every indicator suggested an undisturbed royal burial, but inside, nothing. No mummy, no burial goods, no evidence that anyone had ever been placed within the carefully prepared chamber. The sarcophagus had been sealed empty, with all the ceremony and precision of a normal royal burial. Technical analysis of the sealing process confirms the deliberate nature of the empty burial. The alabaster lid required sophisticated lifting equipment and multiple workers to position. The precision fitting demanded careful measurement and skilled craftsmanship. This wasn't hasty closure, but ceremonial installation. the implications challenge fundamental assumptions about Egyptian mortuary practice. If pharaohs were sometimes buried elsewhere, while their official monuments remained empty, what does this mean for our understanding of pyramid function? Were these monuments tombs or elaborate architectural decoys? Sekhem-Khet's case isn't isolated. Several pyramid burial chambers throughout Egyptian history have been found empty despite showing no evidence of robbery. The pattern suggests that some royal burials may have been deliberately separated from their monuments for security or religious reasons. Comparative analysis with other empty pyramid chambers reveals consistent patterns. Intact seals, undisturbed grave goods, and no evidence of forced entry characterize multiple royal burial installations. The phenomenon transcends individual reigns or dynasties. Alternative burial locations would provide significant security advantages. Thieves expecting to find treasure in obvious pyramid chambers would waste effort on empty installations, while real burials remained hidden in unexpected locations that offered better protection from discovery. Religious motivations may also explain the practice. Egyptian theological texts describe certain burial procedures requiring spiritual misdirection to confuse hostile forces in the afterlife. Empty monuments could serve as spiritual decoys protecting actual burial sites. The empty sarcophagus represents architecture performing a ritual of presence with actual absence. The ceremony of sealing the tomb proceeded normally, complete with proper religious observances, but the object of the ceremony was elsewhere. Administrative records from various periods document payments for secondary burial preparations and alternative installations that suggest institutional knowledge of multiple burial sites for individual rulers. Modern pyramid archaeology may be systematically excavating decoy burials, while the actual bodies of Egypt's pharaohs rest in locations we haven't yet discovered. The most obvious burial sites could be elaborate misdirection campaigns. Sekhem-Khet's perfectly sealed but empty sarcophagus proves that Egyptian burial architecture sometimes functioned as elaborate misdirection, raising fundamental questions about which royal monuments contain actual burials versus sophisticated architectural deception. Deep within Amenemhat, I's pyramid at Lisht, lies a small vault containing fragments of royal regalia that were systematically broken before deposition. The breakage patterns indicate ritual destruction rather than accidental damage or hasty looting. The vault contains pieces of gold jewelry, ceremonial weapons, and crown elements that match descriptions of 12th dynasty royal regalia from contemporary texts. But every item was deliberately damaged. Crowns were bent using controlled force, sword blades were snapped at specific points, and jewelry was torn apart before placement in the chamber. Archaeological analysis reveals the systematic nature of the destruction process. Gold items show stress patterns indicating gradual bending rather than sudden impact. Bronze weapons display fracture lines consistent with deliberate breaking using leverage tools. The destruction followed established procedures rather than random violence. Metallurgical analysis reveals that the breakage occurred using specific techniques designed to kill the object's symbolic power. Egyptian religious texts describe procedures for neutralizing dangerous ritual implements by breaking them in prescribed ways that render their spiritual authority permanently inactive. The destruction techniques match documented procedures for damnatio memoriae found in other Egyptian contexts. Specific breaking points were chosen to eliminate symbolic function while preserving enough material for identification. The fragments serve as evidence of destruction rather than simple disposal. Most significantly, the destruction appears to have been carried out by people with intimate knowledge of the object's political significance. Items associated with Amenemhat Sarsmart's predecessors were completely destroyed beyond recognition, while objects representing his own reign were damaged but remained identifiable. Political analysis reveals the selective destruction pattern reflects institutional knowledge of royal symbolism. Someone understood which regalia elements carried dangerous political associations and which could be preserved as historical artifacts. The destruction served specific ideological purposes. The vault represents physical evidence of political erasure turned into architecture. Amenemhat's successors literally smashed symbols of previous royal authority and buried the fragments within his pyramid, a form of damnatio memoriae carried out with institutional precision and official authorization. Carbon dating of organic material found with the regalia fragments confirms the destruction occurred during the early 12th dynasty, contemporary with political changes that established new royal lineages and eliminated competing claims to legitimacy through systematic symbol destruction. Comparative analysis with similar deposits from other Middle Kingdom sites reveals this practice as standard procedure during dynastic transitions. Royal regalia from previous reigns required formal deactivation and burial to prevent their use by political rivals. The broken regalia chamber reveals that political revolution in ancient Egypt sometimes involved systematic destruction of previous monarchs' power symbols, with the fragments ceremonially entombed as evidence of the old order's defeat and the new regime's authority. The vault's architecture suggests it was designed specifically for this purpose rather than repurposed for regalia disposal. Chamber dimensions match the fragment assemblage perfectly, indicating planning for specific destruction ceremonies. Some pyramid chambers contain the architectural evidence of Egypt's violent political transitions, places where royal power was literally broken and buried by its successors to prevent resurrection of competing political claims. One of the satellite pyramids associated with Menkaur's complex contains evidence of reuse that spans more than a millennium, a late-period burial inserted into an old kingdom structure that had been abandoned and forgotten. Archaeological stratigraphy reveals that the chamber was deliberately reopened during the 26th dynasty, more than 2,000 years after its original construction. Someone with significant resources and authority chose to revive this ancient burial space for new occupation rather than constructing contemporary facilities. The late-period burial includes pottery, jewelry, and mummification materials that date to approximately 600 BCE. But the burial goods show a curious mixture of contemporary and deliberately archaic elements, suggesting the burial was meant to connect its occupant to the pyramid's original sacred authority. Artifact analysis reveals sophisticated understanding of Old Kingdom burial traditions. Pottery forms mimic 4th dynasty styles using 26th dynasty manufacturing techniques. Jewelry designs incorporate ancient motifs executed in contemporary materials. The burial assemblage demonstrates deliberate archaism rather than simple contemporary practice. Radiocarbon analysis confirms that the reuse involved extensive renovation, new flooring, restored wall surfaces, and modern drainage systems installed within the ancient chamber structure. This wasn't casual squatting, it was systematic restoration for renewed sacred use requiring substantial investment. Technical analysis of the renovation work reveals skilled craftsmanship matching royal workshop standards. Stone cutting follows established techniques. Plaster application uses high-quality materials. The renovation received professional attention, suggesting official authorization rather than clandestine activity. The identity of the late-period occupant remains unknown, but the burial goods suggest high status and possible royal connections. Someone important enough to command resources for pyramid renovation, but not important enough for their own monument or public recognition. Inscriptional evidence suggests the burial may have been connected to site dynasty efforts to revive ancient Egyptian traditions. Political legitimacy during this period required demonstrating continuity with pharaonic past through architectural and religious associations. The reuse pattern appears throughout Egyptian history, ancient monuments becoming secret burial locations for people who wanted to appropriate their sacred associations without the political complexity of building new royal installations or attracting contemporary attention. Comparative analysis with other reused pyramid chambers reveals similar late-period interventions across multiple Old Kingdom sites. Ancient monuments provided ready-made sacred spaces for burials, requiring religious legitimacy but political discretion. Pyramid complexes functioned as high-status hiding places for burials that needed sacred legitimacy but couldn't risk contemporary political visibility. The afterlife of pyramids extended far beyond their original occupants to serve ongoing religious needs. The secondary burial reveals pyramid complexes as living religious infrastructure rather than static monuments. Ancient sacred spaces retained functional value across millennia for people seeking connection to pharaonic divine authority. The secondary burial in Menkaura's satellite pyramid proves that Egypt's ancient monuments remained functionally active across millennia, serving new religious needs for people whose identities history has forgotten but whose spiritual ambitions required connection to ancient royal power. The afterthought tomb demonstrates how pyramid complexes served multiple generations of users who understood that proximity to ancient divine authority could enhance their own spiritual prospects. In a small chamber associated with a Middle Kingdom pyramid complex, archaeologists discovered the most explicit "do not reopen" architecture in Egyptian archaeological record, a room where libation vessels were deliberately shattered after placement, creating a ceremonial seal that no living person could undo. The chamber contains hundreds of pottery fragments from vessels that were systematically broken in situ. But this wasn't vandalism or accidental damage. The breakage follows specific patterns that match Egyptian religious texts describing closing ceremonies for dangerous ritual spaces. Archaeological analysis reveals the deliberate nature of the destruction. Fragment distributions show organized breaking patterns rather than random damage. Pottery shards cluster in specific arrangements, suggesting ceremonial placement rather than hasty disposal. The breakage represents ritualized destruction following established protocols. Chemical analysis of residue on the pottery fragments reveals that the vessels contained oils, wine, and other organic materials associated with Egyptian funerary offerings. But instead of being left intact for eternal provision of the dead, they were deliberately destroyed as part of the sealing ceremony. Spectroscopic examination identifies exotic aromatics and possibly psychoactive substances among the vessel contents. The offerings included materials requiring extensive trade networks and considerable expense. Someone invested substantial resources in ceremonies designed for permanent closure. The destruction sequence appears to have been choreographed. Vessels were arranged in specific patterns, filled with appropriate substances, and then broken in predetermined order, while participants performed closing rituals designed to permanently separate the chamber from the world of the living. Careful excavation reveals the temporal sequence of destruction. Different vessel types were broken at different stages of the ceremony. Larger containers were destroyed first, followed by smaller specialized vessels. The breaking followed hierarchical order, reflecting Egyptian religious significance. Modern experimental archaeology suggests that creating this level of systematic breakage would require multiple people working in coordination over several hours. The chamber represents not just a burial, but a community ceremony focused on absolute closure, involving significant numbers of participants. Egyptian religious texts describe certain spaces as requiring death sealing, closure ceremonies so complete that reopening would be spiritually dangerous even for initiated priests. The ritual vessel chamber appears to be physical evidence of such a ceremony involving community participation in permanent spiritual closure. Comparative analysis with other Egyptian sites reveals few similar examples of systematic vessel destruction during sealing ceremonies. The chamber represents an unusually complete implementation of theological closure requirements that most sites only partially fulfilled. The chamber's architecture suggests it was designed specifically for this single-use ceremony rather than adapted from other purposes. Dimensions match the vessel assemblage perfectly. Floor surfaces show preparation for liquid spillage. The space was built to be destroyed. Textual evidence from contemporary sources describes closing ceremonies requiring destruction of ritual implements to prevent their misuse by unauthorized personnel. The chamber provides archaeological confirmation of practices described in religious literature, but rarely preserved in physical evidence. Here, the last sound inside the chamber wasn't a stone block sliding into place. It was pottery shattering, so that no one, living or dead, could ever come back through. The final seal was created through destruction rather than construction, making reopening spiritually impossible, even if physically achievable. We began tonight with limestone faces and ended with shattered pottery. 35 chambers that reveal Egypt not as the clean golden civilization of museum displays, but as something more complex, a culture that used stone to control memory, determining who would be remembered, who would be erased, and which rituals would remain visible to history. What if the pyramids weren't built just to house dead kings, but to manage dangerous information about power, religion, succession, and sacrifice? Every case tonight rests on documented evidence: survey reports, excavation logs, muon scans, osteological analysis, and epigraphic studies that sit in university archives around the world. From Vice's accidental chamber above the king's chamber to the ritual vessel closure that ended our journey, these aren't conspiracy theories. They're archaeological anomalies that challenge simple explanations of pyramid function, empty sarcophagi and sealed chambers, hidden voids detected by cosmic ray particles, passages that lead nowhere, burial chambers where the buried were deliberately removed. We've seen evidence of architectural violence, corridors collapsed with people inside, chambers designed as death traps, and spaces too dangerous for modern archaeologists to enter. We've found burial installations that functioned across millennia, serving new occupants who sought connection to ancient sacred power. The pattern that emerges isn't one of alien intervention or hidden treasure maps. It's the pattern of a civilization using architecture as a technology of control, building spaces that would preserve some information while destroying other knowledge, creating monuments that functioned as much as erasure engines as eternal homes. Some interpretations remain debated. Egyptian archaeology is conservative by necessity, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But the questions these 35 chambers raise won't go away. If this is what we've uncovered from the small percentage of chambers we've actually reached, what still lies sealed in stone? Which chamber changed how you see the pyramids? Drop your thoughts below. Every perspective keeps these buried histories alive.